Dear listeners, a big shout out for the author D. Wayne Harbison for sharing this amazing story. Now let's start with the story. May 2005. Rain tiptoed up the stairs to his girlfriend's Russell, Kentucky apartment. Well, girlfriend was kind of a misnomer. They'd been a couple since high school and had remained a couple throughout his college career, albeit a long-distance one as he attended college in Florida. They'd made plans to get married when he finished his degree and found a job. He'd managed to finish his finals early, and he was done with school. He even had a lucrative job already lined up with a major special effects company based out of Gulf City, across the bay from Mobile. Sure, he still had graduation, but at this point, he had 2 weeks off until then, and a rather large signing bonus sitting in his bank account. He'd driven for over 12 hours nonstop from Florida to northeastern Kentucky to surprise Chelsea. Reaching the door, he checked his watch to make sure he wasn't too early. He smiled when he heard strains of long, slow kisses playing throughout the apartment. He knew that meant she was at least up. He checked his jacket pocket for the small box he'd purchased with part of his signing bonus before fishing out the key he had to Chelsea's apartment. He quietly opened the door and tiptoed inside. The lights were still out in the living room and in the kitchen beyond, and the music was coming from her bedroom, a bedroom he hoped he wouldn't be leaving for a few days. Still wanting to surprise the raven-haired beauty with whom he wanted to spend the rest of his life, he slipped his loafers off and moved toward the bedroom on silent feet. Opening the door, he yelled, "Surprise." It took 2 full syllables for his mind to register what he saw. Chelsea was on her hands and knees on the bed as his older brother, Sebastian, was having sex with his girlfriend. What the hell? Sebastian growled as he recognized Rain. Bro, it's not what you think, Chelsea screamed. Rain's last coherent thought was, what the hell else could it be? Then a red-hot rage surged through his soul. With a singular purpose, he strode across the room, grabbed his much larger brother by his arm and yanked him from the bed, slamming him into the wall. He began raining blow after blow onto his brother, growling out a series of profanities that would make a sailor blush. All the while Chelsea screamed for them to stop. Rain shook his head and glanced over to her as she was trying to pull the comforter up over her bare chest. And that mistake cost him dearly. With a scream of rage of his own, Sebastian surged from against the wall and hit Rain with a right and left combo that left him reeling. He staggered back, and his brother still advanced. This time he rained body blows against Rain's slighter form. He felt ribs crack on both sides from strikes by Sebastian. Rain tried to drop his elbows to protect his ribs when a hard right cross caught him in the jaw, sending him sprawling across the bed. With a cry of rage, Sebastian, still nude, grabbed Rain by the collar and the belt and lifted him into the air before slinging him headfirst across the bed and into the large oak dresser on the other side of the room. As his head crashed into the mirror, he felt a fiery pain in his left eye, and blood ran down his face. With a pain-fueled rage, he spun around on his brother and began to swing wildly. One blow glanced off his brother's jaw before Sebastian lashed out with his foot, kicking Rain firmly in the juncture between his legs. As he bent over in the most intense pain he'd ever felt, his brother grabbed him by the head and slammed his knee into Rain's face. After that, Rain didn't feel the series of punches his brother jackhammered into his face and head. He was beyond punch-drunk. He had no idea how long he sat there on his knees, incoherent, his mind refusing to work, but it was long enough for Sebastian to grab his clothes and stalk out the door. Don't ever hit me again, Rain. We could have talked this out, but you wanted to fight. Rain sat there on his knees as Chelsea grabbed the phone and called the emergency services before coming over to him. She was crying as she tried to wipe the blood from his face. I'm sorry. I didn't want this to happen. Rain shook his head and staggered to his feet. Chelsea put herself between him and the door, blocking his exit. Stay until the paramedics get here. A deep, emasculating shame welled up in Rain as tracks of tears plowed away the blood on his face. He shook his head and shoved her aside, staggering out the door. She clung to his jacket, trying to hold him in place, but he simply let his arms slide out of the sleeves, not even noting the pain as the bone from a compound fracture in his left forearm tore the material. He had no idea how he made it down the stairs, or to his car. The fact that he drove all the way to the nearby state park without wrecking was a miracle. Finally, parking, he got out and stumbled into the woods, seeking solace from the pain in his soul that overwhelmed even the physical pain he felt. He was too ashamed to face anyone. His masculinity had been stripped from him first, by the cucking and then the beating. He could not look anyone in the eye. Best to disappear and lick his wounds. Somewhere, off the main trail, his endurance finally gave out. He toppled forward into a ravine and lay there, beaten, heartbroken, emasculated, and ashamed. He wasn't even conscious the next day when they transported him to the hospital. Sebastian Darrow stormed into his dad's home and threw down his jacket as the red rage that had overcome him gave way to deep shame. He wasn't comfortable with the shame, so he dredged up the feeling of being forcefully pulled from Chelsea and then flung into the wall. He felt his jaw where Rain had hit him with a good right cross and realized that he had a few loose teeth. The rage wouldn't return. It had burnt itself out with the sickening sound of Rain's bones breaking, with the sight of his blood smeared all over the wall, with the sight of the bloody pulp of his little brother's face. Only the shame remained. He looked down at his hands and realized they were ragged and bruised and covered in his brother's blood. What in the name of God do you think you're doing? His sister, Melissa, stalked through the door, her eyes wild and her face full of fury. I just got off the phone with Chelsea. She says Rain caught you two in bed, and you beat the hell out of him. There was a cold fury in her voice to match that in her face. Sebastian just shook his head. He didn't want to talk about it. Melissa, I don't want to deal with this now. Well, you're gonna have to. Sleeping with your brother's girlfriend was a big enough of a shit move. Getting her pregnant blew up 2 families. But beating your brother to a pulp is going too damn far. Don't you think I know that? He whirled on her, his fists clenched into tight balls of fury. Well, what you don't know is that Rain staggered out of there and left in his car, a bloody mess. Nobody knows where he is. Dad and Grace are over there now. Mom is on her way here, and Shannon is fit to be tied. I've screwed everything up, haven't I? That pretty much describes it, she told him. Exactly how much damage are you going to do to this family before you're satisfied? I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Chelsea and I weren't supposed to fall in love. I just thought she might need some company while Rain was gone. It wasn't supposed to go that far. Oh, but it did, big brother. It went a lot farther. You not only slept with her, but you also got her pregnant. Now, when Rain finds out, you beat him to a bloody pulp. He hit me first. Sebastian nearly whined and realized he sounded like a pathetic child. So, you beat the shit out of him for it. What Chelsea described wasn't a fight. It was a curb stomping. I don't know what happened, Sebastian protested. It just all went hazy. I've never been that angry before in my life. Well, you can't say that anymore. What the hell was he doing home? I thought he was going to stay in Gainesville until after graduation. Beats me, Melissa said with a shrug. But he did come home, and he caught you. Now there's hell to pay. I suggest you get your butt out there and see if you can find him. And if I were you, I damn sure wouldn't turn my back on Shannon right now. The only thing keeping him from starting round 2 with you is he's out there trying to find Rain. That's all I need. Shannon's a hothead. It seems to run in the family, she told him. It's the Scots-Irish in us. Sebastian nodded to her. You're right. I need to find him. And do what? Sebastian shrugged and said, I don't know. Get him help. Did Chelsea say which way Rain went? She said he turned onto 23 headed toward Greenup. Then that's where I'm heading. He grabbed his coat and headed out the door. Good luck, Bastian. You're going to need it. Chelsea Borden sat sobbing on her sofa. Her whole world had exploded this morning, and nothing would ever be the way it was supposed to be. She never meant for things to go as far as they did with Sebastian. Rain was away at school, and only came home for holidays and for summer break. Sebastian stepped in as a friend at first, but then things got complicated. When they found out that she was pregnant 2 months ago, she knew they had to tell Rain. They decided to wait until he had graduated and came home. Of course, they had to be discreet and go ahead and tell their folks. It had exploded all over both families and had driven a wedge between Sebastian and his youngest brother, Shannon. 304 and bitch were among the words he kept throwing around until Sebastian had finally stepped in and threatened to pop him in the mouth if he didn't quit it. At that point, Shannon had gone no contact with Sebastian, and Chelsea knew that she was going to cause a rift between 3 brothers, not just 2. She wondered if the threat of violence had been what had kept Shannon from going to Rain before this point. Now, sitting on her sofa wearing a set of old sweats, she had answered as many questions as the police, her family, and Sebastian's family wanted. The police took pictures of the bedroom and took her statement, and then left with a promise to keep a lookout for his car. Did you have any idea that Rain was coming home early? Her mother looked over at Tom, Rain's father, and asked. No, Bernice, none, he said. I wish I had. Any idea where he could have gone? Chelsea's mother was nearly as upset with her as Shannon and Rain were. She had made it clear that she'd not raised her daughter to act like she had. She was genuinely worried about Rain. Chelsea shook her head and wiped her nose with a tissue. No, he was hurt. He was hurt badly. He was bleeding, and it looked like his arm was broken. I didn't like the look I saw in his eyes. He's beyond hurt. He's devastated. I wonder who did that? Shannon asked from across the room as he picked up the denim jacket that his brother had evidently left behind. Chelsea watched him fold it across his arm. Then, with a puzzled look on his face, he reached into the pocket and pulled out a small black ring box. Dad, he said ominously. Yeah? Tom replied. Look, Shannon told him, holding up the box. Is this what I think it is? Every eye turned toward Chelsea, and she felt like crawling into a hole somewhere. She heard the sound of the box opening, and then the blonde youth gave a low whistle. That's some rock. Looking in the jacket further, he pulled out a small piece of paper and looked at it. Certificate says 5 carats. He said softly, Rain has good tastes. Then glancing in her direction, he added, with some things at least. Shannon, Tom warned. Yes, sir, Shannon said and handed the jacket, ring, and certificate to Tom. I'm heading out to look for him. Where? Chelsea asked. He's not here, so he has to be out there somewhere. And his car sort of stands out. Chelsea frowned at the thought of the bumblebee yellow and black 72 AMC Javelin Rain had found his sophomore year in high school and had then worked his butt off restoring. Go, his stepmother, Grace told him dismissively. Shannon shot her a cold look. Grace had kept pushing Chelsea and Sebastian together and was delighted when their friendship had flared into something else. She wasn't sure why, but she thought it had something to do with the acrimonious divorce between Tom and their mother, Ruth. There was just too much chaos around them, and Chelsea had no idea who to turn to. She felt awful, and she felt alone, and she hated it. She hated herself. Grace sat down next to her and said, Why don't I take you to our place and fix you something to eat? You really don't need to be alone right now. Her mother looked at Grace and said, Maybe I'd better take her to my house. It might not be a good idea for her to be around either Sebastian or Rain right now. You're probably right. Grace stood and said, I'll get her a change of clothes. Thanks, her mom replied. Come on, Chelsea. I'm going to take you home. All Chelsea could do was nod. The only thing that kept the self-destructive thoughts in her head at bay right now was the knowledge that she carried her and Sebastian's unborn child in her womb. Chelsea Borden was not in a good place. Shannon Darrow had been sitting quietly with the rest of the family in the living room while they waited for Grace to get off the phone with the police. Shannon was less sitting and more like stewing in his anger, and he got the feeling that so was Melissa, but right now anger wasn't helping his brother. Every now and then he'd glance over to where Sebastian was sitting with his head in his hands, and his anger would just flare up again. Shannon could not figure out how their brother could betray Rain on so many levels. Right now, he found the very sight of the tall, well-built man left him with a cold indifference. They found him, Grace said to the room as she put down the receiver of the phone. Where? Shannon demanded. Off one of the trails at Greenbow. A hiker found him at the bottom of a gully. How the hell did he get there? The blonde teen demanded. I don't know. His car is in the parking lot at the boat dock, so they think he walked. How is he? Shannon asked. They've taken him to Our Lady of Belafonte. They said on top of some severe injuries, he was suffering from hypothermia from being on the ground all night. It got down to the 30s last night. I'll get my coat, Sebastian said, rising from his seat. Don't you think you've done enough damage for now? Shannon demanded. I'm sure that you're probably the last person in the world Rain wants to see now. He paused a moment and then added, You and that little bitch. Shannon, his dad warned. No, Dad. Let's face it. If my older brother over there had shown the least modicum of loyalty to Rain, we wouldn't be sitting here like this. If he and Chelsea hadn't stuck a knife in his back and then twisted it, we'd be talking about Rain's graduation. Instead, Mr. I can't keep it in my pants over there not only betrayed Rain, but he also then beat him nearly to death. Maybe you should keep your mouth shut, little brother, Sebastian said darkly. Or what? You'll beat me half to death too? Shannon taunted him. You have no idea how sorry I am about all of this, Sebastian told him. Not sorry enough. Shannon cut him off. Shannon, Melissa's voice cut in. Why don't you and I go with Dad and Grace? Sebastian can mind the fort here at home. There was an iron to his twin sister's voice that told Shannon that Sebastian was not going to get off quite so easily with this. I think that he and Chelsea need to talk about a few things. Rain knows about them now. Now it's time to figure out how they're going to deal with it. Are they still going to get married and make an honest woman out of her? I hate that term, Shannon said with disgust as he grabbed his own jacket. There's nothing honest about either one of them. Maybe, but Rain at least thought she was. That engagement ring he bought for her was massive, Melissa said. Sebastian's head shot up. What engagement ring? Shannon knew his sister's comment hit home. Evidently, Rain was going to propose to Chelsea. A 5-carat ring is nothing to sneeze at, Shannon said, twisting the verbal knife. It was much larger than the one you bought her. He smiled and walked out the door. When they were out of earshot, his dad looked over at him and said, "You shouldn't pick at your brother like that. He already feels bad enough." "He feels bad enough?" Shannon asked incredulously. "He feels bad enough?" "Somehow, I don't think he's feeling nearly as bad as what Rain is right now. I'm telling you to knock it off. You have no idea what Bastian is feeling right now. In some ways, he's hurting more than Rain." Shannon shook his head and said, "I don't buy it." When his dad started to say something, Shannon just held up his hands. "But I'll keep my mouth shut. It's bad enough that it's all over town now." "Whose reputation are you worried about, yours or Bastian's?" Melissa asked. "Rain's actually," his dad said. "I don't understand. Bastian not only cucked Rain, but he also then beat him for daring to try and stop it. I don't know if you're old enough to understand these things right now. I think you probably are, but as much as it pains me to say it, Bastian might not have done Rain any favors when he stopped." "Dad!" Shannon and Melissa protested and stopped as they looked at their father who was climbing into the Ford. "I don't think Rain is going to ever be able to look in the eye. His brother, you, me, or any other man who knows what happened. Bastian destroyed Rain's sense of what it means to be a man." "That's stupid," Melissa said. "Maybe, but it's how men operate." Shannon just nodded his head and said, "I hadn't thought about it that way. What should we do?" "What can we do?" his dad asked. "Just be there for him." "I think I can do that." "Your son hasn't yet regained consciousness, Mr. Darrow," the doctor told Tom. He was a tall man in his late 40s with salt and pepper hair and a large beak of a nose. He had brown eyes and an olive skin tone and a calm voice. "How bad is he?" "He started out very bad. I mean, near death bad. We thought we lost him a couple of times before we got his body temperature up. Afterwards we dealt with his other injuries, which include broken ribs, one of which punctured a lung, and the rest are bruised. He has lacerations all over his scalp and face, and from the x-rays of his skull, it looks like part of his left orbital sphenoid bone was broken. It appears to have severed the optic nerve. He has a broken right arm, and one testicle was crushed. The other is bruised. He's passing blood through the catheter from his bladder, and we believe his kidneys are bruised. To be honest, it's probably for the best that he's still unconscious, otherwise he'd be in a lot of pain." "What about hypothermia?" The doctor nodded and said, "We had some problems getting his core body temperature up, but we were finally successful. Right now, we're trying to fight off infections." That broken arm was a compound fracture that pierced the skin. It lay in the water most of the night, so there's no telling what kind of bacteria it picked up. "Just tell me if he's going to be okay," Tom demanded. "It depends on how you define okay. He should return to normal, for the most part. He's probably going to be blind in his left eye. We can't really tell until he wakes up." Sighing, he added, "But let's face it, Mr. Darrow, your son was pummeled by someone big enough and strong enough to break ribs and bones. I do hope he's going to press charges." Tom snorted. "I don't know. It was a family member. So, I've been told. If nothing else, I'd say both need some serious therapy." "When can we see him?" "I'll let you and his mother peek in on him. But I don't want anyone in there too long until he wakes up and we can do a better job assessing his condition." Tom nodded and said, "Understood. His mother is on her way. We're not together. I remarried." "Well, why don't you go on in, and we'll let his mother in when she gets here. But just for a moment." "Thanks, Doc." The doctor nodded and said, "Follow me." Tom was a bit surprised when the doctor entered the room with him, but thought nothing of it. The first thing that struck Tom was the stark loneliness of the room. A lone figure that Tom could not at first identify lay on the bed. There were dressings on his face and head. His left eye was swollen, and his right was black and blue. His left arm was in a cast, and a tube ran from the back of his hand to an IV drip. He could see the bandages and braces outlined under the thin white blanket that was tucked around his body. The sight of his son in that condition nearly brought tears to his eyes. How could things degenerate to this point so quickly? How could one brother do this to another? The worst part about it was that according to Chelsea, it was technically self-defense. He shook his head and turned from the room, fighting back the tears in his eyes. With his mind full of questions, sadness, and anger, he reached the waiting room where the rest of the family was sitting quietly. That is everyone except Sebastian and Chelsea. "Well?" Shannon asked, his voice still dripping with recrimination and anger. Tom took a deep breath and said, "He looks like hell warmed over. The doctor says that he may have lost the vision in his left eye. They think a bone fragment may have severed his optic nerve. He's got several broken ribs, his arm in a cast, and there are cuts and bruises all over his forehead. His kidneys are bruised, and there are some severe injuries of a more personal nature." "When can we see him?" Melissa asked. "The doctor says they want to evaluate his condition after he regains consciousness, So sometime after that, Shannon and Melissa exchanged glances and then went back to reading the magazines in the waiting room. Something had been communicated without a word, and that thought worried Tom. He knew both of them had their falling outs with Grace over her encouraging Sebastian's and Chelsea's closeness. On more than one occasion, Melissa had told Tom's wife that she was setting up the three of them for heartache. Of course she'd been right, but even now Grace seemed oblivious to her role in the hot mess that had become of their family. Tom grabbed a months-old copy of Field and Streamed and tried to lose himself in how to find and catch Monster Base. Not long after he sat down, his ex-wife Ruth made an appearance. She spoke to the doctor and then went back to see Rain. Returning to the waiting room in tears, she looked over at Grace and her face flushed with raw fury and heartbreak. Shannon must have caught it too because he immediately stood next to his mother and put an arm around her. "You okay, Mom?" She shook her head and said, "No, I'm not okay. How could this have happened?" Again, her eyes cut to Grace. "I don't know," Shannon said, "but we'll work through it. He was starting to wake up when I was in there. The nurse bustled me out of there and called the doctor. They're evaluating him now." Her voice sounded weak and frail. "That at least is good news," Melissa said. "It should have never gotten to this point." She stared at Tom and said, "I should have never let you talk me into waiting until after graduation to tell Rain." This time there was iron and fire in her voice. "We all decided it would be best to wait so it didn't interfere with his last semester," Tom said. "Dumb idea," Melissa told him. In hindsight, yeah, Tom agreed. "Come on, Mom," Shannon told his mom. "Have a seat and I'll get you some coffee." She nodded and sat down on the opposite side of Melissa, who took her hand and tried to comfort her. Again, time seemed to stretch out, and he had no idea how long had passed until the doctor once again joined them. "We've evaluated Rain. After talking with him, we've upgraded his condition from serious to fair." He sighed and shook his head and then added, "But I have some bad news, folks." "What?" Tom asked. "Rain has indicated that he doesn't want any visitors." "Not even family?" Grace asked. "He told me, especially family," the doctor revealed. "The sheriff's office is sending over someone to take his statement, but he says he doesn't even want to talk to them." "What can we do?" Ruth asked, now openly sobbing. "Honestly, nothing. Rain is 22 years old. He's old enough to decide what he wants for himself, and as his doctor, I am required to respect his wishes. The best you can do now is go home." Again, Shannon and Melissa exchanged glances. Tom got the feeling they were expecting something like this. "Can you at least give him something for us?" Shannon finally asked. "I can give it to him, but I can't guarantee you that he'll accept it." "That's fine," Shannon said, reaching into his pocket. Much to Tom's surprise, he handed the doctor the little black box and certificate they found in Rain's jacket and a set of keys. "Tell him he lost these somewhere." The doctor took the box and then looked over at Tom's two youngest children. Opening the box, he quickly closed it and said, "I can't take responsibility for this. It's too valuable to leave lying around a hospital room." He smiled weakly and added, "But I can give him the keys." "Thank you," Shannon told him. "Just tell him that I'm hanging on to this for when he wants it." "Shannon?" Tom asked, suddenly worried about what his youngest was up to. "I mean it, Dad. I'm keeping this until he's better and wants it back. There's no way I'm going to let anyone take anything else from him." He looked over at his twin sister, who suddenly stood by his side in solidarity. "Very well," Tom said, realizing this was not the hill upon which he wanted to die. Turning to the doctor, Tom asked, "Will you keep us informed on his progress?" The doctor nodded and said, "All I'm allowed to give you at this point is his general condition, which is fair. Beyond that, regulations require that I don't share any more information about his condition with you." "Even if we're his parents?" Ruth asked. "He's over 21. Even if you're his parents." Rain surfaced from an ocean of oblivion into a world of pain and shame. He saw the doctor standing over him. "Mr. Darrow, are we feeling any better today?" Throwing on a mask of indifference, he answered, "I'm okay. Are you still in pain?" Rain shook his head. He knew that if he said yes, that would mean another round of painkillers, and he didn't want that. He wanted the dreams they brought even less than the pain and emotion. "No." Looking at the chart, the doctor said, "According to this, you've refused painkillers for 3 days now." "Yes." "Why, Mr. Darrow? I know you have to be in intense pain." He pulled the curtain around to check the wound on his scrotum where the tissue of the crushed testicle had to be surgically removed. "You at least seem to be healing physically. I'm going to continue to suggest you receive counseling. I don't think you are ever going to get past this trauma without it." "No," Rain answered, again, refusing to engage the doctor. He knew he probably should talk to someone, but the deep shame he felt wouldn't allow him to open up. He couldn't stand the thought of talking to anyone who knew what had happened, what he'd allowed to happen, what had been done to him. "I can't make you, Mr. Darrow," the doctor said, "but I do highly recommend it. Even I can see that you're suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder and need to talk about it to someone." "No," Rain replied, keeping his voice neutral. "When can I get out of here? If I had somewhere to send you, I'd release you today. But you insist on not returning to either of your parents' homes, so I'm going to keep you here at least long enough to make sure you have healed enough to drive back to Gainesville." "When?" "Maybe next week," the doctor told him. "If you would just let someone else drive you." "No." "Then next week," the doctor repeated. "If you need anything, please call the nurse." Rain simply nodded and then turned onto his side to look out the window. The trees all around the hospital were beginning to bud and sprout their leaves and flowers. The world was awakening from its long winter sleep, and Rain hated watching it. But he hated the vision of Sebastian and Chelsea in the act that kept cropping up in his mind even more. That, of course, led to the fight and its repercussions, which brought back the shame and the pain. At that point, all he could do was cry, and cry he did. "Has anyone heard anything about Rain?" Sebastian Darrow asked his family at the Sunday breakfast table at his father's home. "Why should you care?" Shannon asked. "I care," Sebastian told him. "I know you may think I don't. You have no idea how much I regret what has happened. I just want to know if he's okay. He's been upgraded to good," his father told him. "Outside of that, they won't tell us anything." "Damn it." Sebastian nearly hit the table in frustration. "Why won't he talk to anybody?" "You really have to ask that?" Melissa asked from across the table. Glancing to where his fists were clenched, she raised an eyebrow. Catching the look, Sebastian forced himself to open his hands. "I know why he won't talk to me. I don't blame him, but why won't he talk to anybody else?" "I think you know the answer to that, son," his father told him gently. "I'm not trying to pile on to you." He glanced over at Melissa and Shannon. "He's hurting in the most devastating way a man can be hurt. It's going to be a long time before he's likely to talk to anybody." "I'm sorry," Sebastian said to the room. "You have no idea how sorry I am. I was angry. No, I was enraged. I was ashamed. When he hit me, I just lost my temper. You need to talk to someone about that," Shannon told him. "Especially before you get married." He frowned and added softly, "Although it would be poetic justice if that temper of yours got directed at Chelsea." "Shannon," Grace interjected. "What a thing to say." His head popped up. "Really? I mean, really? You pushed this. You encouraged it. Now, Rain has to pay for your dumb fantasy, for Bastian's screw up. In the meantime, Chelsea and Bastian are going about their lives, planning their wedding, and getting ready to spend the rest of their lives together. A life that was supposed to have been Rain's. Can you really blame me for being angry at him, at them? It wasn't a dumb fantasy. I still say that Bastian and Chelsea make a better couple than she and Rain. And that's what he gets for going away for 4 years. No woman should be required to wait 4 years. Evidently, Rain waited, Melissa interjected. "It's not the same," Grace said, obviously looking at her husband for support. Instead, he blushed furiously but said nothing. Sebastian knew what was going to happen next before it even happened. Shannon tossed down his napkin and rose from the table. "Yeah, like you and Dad not even waiting for the ink to dry on his divorce papers before getting married." He didn't shout. He simply spoke in a cold, dead tone and then angrily stalked off. Sebastian's dad watched the back of his son retreat from the dining room before looking over at Melissa for some kind of comment. She shook her head and said, "Don't look at me. I agree with Shannon." Then she too rose from the table and left with her twin. "And then there were 3, Sebastian said coldly. Tears began to crawl down Grace's face. Sebastian's father just shrugged and said, "What's done is done. It is what it is." Hundreds of calls, emails, and text messages had gotten Chelsea no closer to talking to Rain, to try to explain herself, to apologize for what happened than it did anyone else. He adamantly refused phone calls through the hospital switchboard, and the voicemail on his phone was full. But she couldn't let things stand between them like they were. She had to see him, just once. She had to try and apologize. So she snuck into the hospital one night after visiting hours. It was easier than she thought. Honestly, unless a patient was in ICU, or there was a guard outside the door for some reason, then all she had to do was act like she belonged there, and time her entrance and exit during the nurse's rounds. So, she got on the floor around 9:30 and waited until the nurse had come out of Rain's room and slipped in behind her. She was shocked at what she'd seen. Rain was not a big man, nowhere as stocky or strong as Sebastian, but he still cleared 6 feet and had a runner's build. What she saw lying in the hospital bed was a shell of his former self. There were bandages on the sides of his face and on his forehead. His left eye was swollen shut, and the flesh around his right had turned from a sickly green to nearly black. His left arm was in a cast, and there were pillows under his knees. She closed the door behind her and softly said, "Rain?" He turned his head toward her, and she saw a series of painful emotions flash across his face. Anger, hate, fear, and there was something else, something that nearly tore her soul out. Shame. Finally, he turned back to stare at the ceiling, refusing to say anything. "Rain, I'm so sorry this happened. It wasn't supposed to happen. You were gone, and I was lonely. Sebastian was there when you weren't." He neither spoke nor moved, just stared emptily at the ceiling tiles above him. "Please, Rain, at least speak to me." "Go." "I can't. Not until you've heard me out." He turned onto his other side facing opposite her and stared out the window into the cool spring night. From the mirror on the bathroom door, she could see his face. Tears began to run down his cheeks. "I'm sorry, Rain. I didn't mean for this to happen. I had no idea you were coming home." He was silent as tears flowed down his face. "We were going to tell you after you graduated. We didn't want it to interfere with your studies, with your finals. You talked about them so much when you were home for spring break. We knew you had plans for a career, and we didn't want to take that from you too." Still he lay there in silence, fighting back the sobs. The shame on his face was nearly more than she could handle. "I'm pregnant," she finally said. "It's Bastian's. That was the reason I wouldn't sleep with you when you were home in April. I couldn't bring myself to hurt you more, to hurt him by being with both of you." From the reflection in the mirror, she saw him squeeze his right eye shut in pain. He finally lost his battle with his emotions and began to sob softly. "Please talk to me, Rain," she pleaded through her own tears. "Please." Between sobs, he managed to croak, "Go. You have nothing to say that I want to hear. Haven't you done enough to hurt me? Why do you need to keep twisting the knife? You have what you wanted. He has what he wanted. Why can't you leave me alone?" "I'm sorry," she said through her own tears. "I didn't mean it." He just lay there, crying like a child. "I just wanted you to know, I'm sorry. I love you, but I love Sebastian too. Something had to give. When I became pregnant, that something had to be you. Go." He nearly whispered. "Please stop. Just go." He slowly curled up into a sobbing ball of hurt and pain. "Please tell me that you can forgive me." "Go," he repeated. "I can't give you what you want. Just go. Everything is screwed up. Everyone is angry at Bastian and me. Shannon and Melissa hate us for what we've done. I'm afraid that Shannon's going to fight Sebastian. He's just a kid. He doesn't understand what Sebastian could do to him. I don't want anyone else hurt because of me." He said nothing, but she could see genuine terror in his face at what she said. "Please, if you don't want to talk to me, talk to Bastian. Hear his side of what happened. Talk to Shannon. Or Melissa, your mom. Just talk to someone. You're scaring us all." He refused to speak again as she lay her soul bare to him. He had nothing but tears, shame, and sorrow. He was a shattered soul, and she'd help shatter him. Finally, she went over to the bed to give him one last kiss, but stopped mid-stride when he pulled away from her in terror. That more than anything else hurt her heart, her own soul. Rain was terrified of her, and it was more than she could stand. She turned and fled the room without another word. The nurse called after her, but she hit the stairs, tears of grief and shame nearly blinding her as she pounded down them. She shot across the lobby and out the front doors, stopping for one moment near the fountain out front, trying to remember where she'd parked her car. She regained her bearings, and then raced to it. It took her only a few moments to make it to her apartment that was just down the hill from the hospital. She was still crying when she entered the living room. The lights were still on, and there was movement in the back bedroom. "Hello?" she called. "Back here," she heard Bastian reply. Going back to the bedroom, she found him in the process of replacing busted pieces of drywall he and Rain had damaged in their fight. She could see a cardboard box with shards from the dresser's mirror on the carpet, and the sweeper standing next to the dresser. "I thought you were at your mom's place," he said. "I was, but I went to see Rain." He froze in place. "Did you get to?" She nodded. "I snuck in after visiting hours." "What did he say?" "Go away," she told him. "He kept telling me to go away." "He's being a prick," Bastian told her. But she could tell from his tone that his heart wasn't into it. "He's hurting." "No shit," Bastian said. "No, I mean more than just physical." "I know," he replied softly. "Dad said something that worries me." "What?" she asked. "I overheard him telling Shannon that I didn't do Rain any favors by not finishing it." "I don't see how much more finishing you could have done." "I stopped short of killing him, barely, but I stopped short of it. Dad thinks that that was an even greater betrayal than what I What we already did. What? Heaven help me, but I'm not sure he's not right. What the hell are you talking about, Bastian? We broke him, and then I broke him some more. I humiliated him in the worst way possible. I took his girl. He caught us in the act, and then I beat him to a bloody pulp. I shattered his self-worth, his masculinity. I completely destroyed his manhood. It's no wonder he doesn't want to talk to anybody. He can't look us in the face without us knowing what I did to him. Why did we do it? She asked. Why did you do it? What? The affair or the beating? Both. I can't say what your motivations are, Chelsea. I hope they are because you love me, because if it's not, then that makes what happened even more monstrous. I started off seeing you out by yourself. You were already part of the family as far as most of us were concerned. You'd been there for most holidays since you and Rain got together. I thought you needed a friend. He paused, and then added, and I was a little afraid that you might get lonely and cheat on him. So I got close so I might be able to talk you out of doing something that might hurt Rain. Then I ended up doing exactly what I was trying to protect him from. He put down his trowel and added, as for the fight, when he hit me, I just sort of lost it. Something came over me. I felt like I had to protect you, to protect our baby. It was something deep and primal. The fight was over before I knew it. I didn't calm down until I got to Dad's place, and then what I had done hit me full bore. She nodded and said, I thought we were just friends. I appreciated the attention you were giving me. Then I started connecting with you on an emotional level. When you took me out for Valentine's Day, I realized that I had developed feelings for you. And you were there, and Rain wasn't. We make quite a pair, don't we? He asked. And Rain is paying for it. She shook her head. You didn't see him. If you did, it would probably kill you. He's completely shattered, both physically and emotionally. He was terrified whenever I mentioned you. I said something about Shannon giving you hell, and it became nearly palpable when I did. He was afraid you were going to hurt Shannon. He might have been right, Bastian said. One of the reasons that I'm here is because I'm not welcome at Mom's right now, and Shannon is really trying to push my buttons at Dad's. Where is all this rage coming from, Bastian? She asked, snuggling up against him. I've known you most of my life, and you've never acted like this before. Putting a protective arm around her, he sniffed the top of her head and replied, I don't know. He paused for a long moment, and Chelsea found comfort for her wounded soul under his arm. But I do know something. If we're going to make this thing between us work, then we're going to have to get past this. We're going to have to put it out of our minds, or it's going to eat us from the inside until it tears us apart. Leaning into him, she said, I know, but it still hurts me to know that we hurt Rain that much. I know, he told her, kissing the top of her head. Better than anybody in the world. I know. What are we going to do about it, about him? He sighed and said, there's nothing we can do about it. Rain is going to have to decide if he can live with what has happened. We can't make that decision for him. She turned to face him, concern in her soul. Exactly what do you mean live with what happened? You don't think that he may decide to kill himself? That he should? She watched as her question sank into her fiancé. God, no. I don't mean that. I meant for him to stay here in Russell. He's going to have to decide if he can live with the shame of what I did with him. And so do I. Why does it have to be shame? She asked. Because I hurt my brother. I hurt him more than I can ever make amends. But why should he be ashamed? You may not feel it now. Your emotions are too raw to feel much of anything except your own hurt right now. But in time, you, and I suspect the rest of the family who knows what has happened are going to see him and treat him as less of a man. And that's my fault, and there's nothing I can do about it now. It is what it is. It's part of being a man. Early August 2005. Ruth Darrow watched her oldest child as he made an unusual request of her. Would you please give an invitation to the wedding to Rain? If I were in contact with him, which I am not, why in the name of God's green earth do you think I would do that? Why would you want to do that? Do you really want to hurt him some more? Bastian shook his head and said, no, I just want to offer him an olive branch. I hate that I don't talk to him anymore. Nobody talks to him anymore, Ruth said. I'm going to be brutally honest here with you, son. You're lucky anybody talks to you anymore. If it wasn't for this baby coming along, I think you and Chelsea would be dead to both our families. But grandchildren have a way of doing that to families. You two really screwed up, and Grace just egged it on, and what started as a major problem exploded into a catastrophe. Do we have to rehash this? Sebastian asked. I just wanted to let him know the option is there. I won't hold it against him if he doesn't come. You won't hold it against him? Ruth asked, astonished at the sheer hubris of her oldest son. I can't believe those words just came out of your mouth. Have you no shame in what you did? Bastian looked down at his shoes. I'm ashamed, and so is Chelsea. We're more ashamed than we can ever express, but life has to go on. This baby is going to be here on her own schedule, and nothing that I or anybody else can do can change that. I just wanted to extend an olive branch to my brother. That's not an olive branch, it's a slap in the face. I thought I knew you better than that. Sebastian just hung his head. What can I do to make this right? There's nothing you can do, Bodai. She purposefully chose his nickname from when he was much younger, a nickname that Rain himself had given him. This time you've broken something that can't be fixed. Bastian nodded, not looking up. Does anybody know where he is? Shaking her head, she replied, No. I talked to the registrar at U of F, and they told me that he did not attend graduation citing health reasons, and he had his diploma mailed to him. They wouldn't give me the address. Well, if you do end up in contact with him, please give him the invitation. Okay, she said, taking the off-white envelope from him. In order to keep his family from stalking him, Rain had stopped using his first name and decided to start over in a new city with a new name and reputation. Choosing to use his rather Scottish middle name, he started going by Kai. Actually, most people would be surprised to find out that his full name was entirely Scottish in origin. On official documents, he usually signed things, as are Kai Darrow. It was his way of starting over, and it gave him a modicum of cover from various searches for his name on the internet. It was a good 2.5 months after coming to Gulf City that he walked into Danaher's Folly, the Irish pub-style restaurant he'd been frequenting since he came here. It was nearing 8 o'clock on a Tuesday night, and the regulars had almost all come traipsing in. He smiled over at the waitress who was taking a tourist couple's order and sat down at a table near where a dart game was being taken seriously. He heard a new voice among them that had a lilt to it that seemed to be 1 part Irish, 1 part Welsh, and 2 parts the mid-Atlantic accent that was popular in the US for movies before World War II. The man possessing it was on the small side, somewhere around 5'2" or 3. He had raven-colored shoulder-length hair and had the brightest blue eyes Kai had seen outside of a computer program. He appeared to be in his early 20s and was attractive in an androgynous way. He was also wiping the floor up with the regulars at the dartboard. I see you got the cast off, the waitress said, bringing him his usual hard cider. Kai pulled his thoughts from the game and turned to the woman and said, Yeah, got it off a week ago. Now, it's just a matter of doing all the exercises my physical therapist gave me. Glad to hear that, she told him. Can I get you something from the kitchen? Are you guys still running the special on soup and salad? Yeah, for a couple more days. Then give me the clam chowder, a salad and breadsticks. She smiled and told him, coming right up. Kai realized that the girl was flirting with him, but it just didn't affect him. He was still emotionally numb, and right now, he wasn't looking for any companionship. He was just taking things one day at a time. His body had healed remarkably well in the 2.5 months from that horrible dark day when he discovered his brother and girlfriend. His mind and soul, not so much. He was still walking through his new life like an outsider observing a small insect under a magnifying glass. At least his job was keeping him busy. His boss said he had a natural talent for screen angles and visual storytelling, and was willing to give him as much overtime as he could handle. Because of that leeway, the latest project they were working on, a CGI flick for an independent studio, was coming in ahead of time and under budget. At least something was going right in his life. His physical therapist had recommended a series of exercises to rebuild the strength in his left arm and his torso. He found that he could get lost in the exercises, and it took his mind off what had happened. It didn't stop the nightmares, but over time at least kept them at bay. Still, he felt a deep shame from what happened and refused to talk about it to anyone. He decided to bury himself in his work, his hobbies, and doing the things he enjoyed. After a while, he realized that he could go a couple days without thinking of Chelsea. There were still triggers that sent his mind spinning into despair, but he was learning to ride them out. He still hadn't made any friends. Being seen as a regular at this pub was the closest he'd come so far, and he was good with that. He had work colleagues and had been asked to join them on several outings, but he couldn't bring himself to trust anyone yet, not even his coworkers. He'd become a loner, but he found solace in his independence. He was so caught up in his own thoughts, he didn't notice when the dart player sat down at the table next to him. The man's feet were literally too short to reach the floor. He casually hooked the rung of the tall bar chair with the heel of his penny loafers and sat studying the menu. Kai smiled and nodded to him as the waitress brought him his food. Evening, neighbor, the man said. Kai nodded again as the waitress set down the bowls. Evening, Kai replied. Is this a popular pub? The stranger asked. Kai shrugged. It seems to be. I've only been coming here for a couple months. Long enough for the waitress to note you being minus a caste. Again, Kai shrugged. I don't know if I'm considered a regular yet, but I'm here enough to be recognized. Don't kid yourself, the waitress told him. You're a regular. See? The man said. Then smiling, he said, My name is Hunter Dare. He offered his hand. Yours? Kai didn't want to be rude, so he reached out and shook the man's hand. Kai Darrow. At the touch of the other man's hand, Kai felt something surge through his body and settle somewhere in the pit of his stomach, like the warm heat of a glass of good whiskey. It surprised him, but since the other man didn't react, neither did he. You said you've only been here a couple of months. Where were you before? Gainesville, Kai replied. I was a student at the University of Florida. Got my first job right out of school here in Silver Hill. What do you do? I'm a computer animator, Kai replied. Thought those jobs would be in California. Kai smiled and said, The thing about what I do is that I can do it anywhere and then upload it to the servers. But the company is based here, so here is where I settled after college. Hunter just nodded and then gave the waitress his order. He then turned back to Kai and said, It's good to have flexibility in a job. How much do you know about the city? Not a lot. I'm still learning my way around. Evidently there's a lot of history here. That there is. What do you do? Kai asked. He felt himself relax around this guy. It was probably the most normal conversation he'd had with anyone before his ill-fated trip home. I'm a corporate troubleshooter for my family's business. What brings you here? A little bit of work, but mostly a chance to visit and learn about the area. Like you said, there's a lot of history here. He looked at Hunter's food and asked, Do you mind if I join you? Suit yourself, Kai said with a shrug. He wasn't sure why, but for some reason, this guy just made him feel comfortable. The idea dawned on him that maybe he was coming out of his shell. It was kind of a good feeling. Where do you live? I've got a place downtown. Pricey, Kai told him. It was Dare's turn to shrug. My job has its perks. Much to Kai's surprise, he actually made a friend that night. Hunter just had a way of getting in under Kai's carefully constructed defenses. It was almost as if the man was reading his mind and picking exactly the right things to say. For the first time in months, he smiled and let himself enjoy the evening, including a couple of games of darts that were surprisingly close. It also broke the ice with several other of the regulars, and he was invited to join a game anytime he was in the pub. He knew he wouldn't be any good, not with being blind in one eye now, but it still felt good to be asked. Over the next few months, Kai slowly healed, both physically and mentally. He made friends at the pub, got to know his co-workers better, and began to let his guard down. He still found that he didn't trust most people, but he managed to forge a strange friendship with the short, dark-haired man that had introduced himself to Kai that Tuesday evening. Their conversations had a cathartic effect on Kai, even if he wasn't discussing his troubled background. It was as if the other man could reach into his mind and pick out what he needed to say to help Kai do his own healing. The more he healed, the more his mind opened up to the world around him. He began to discover that there was something different about Gulf City, something to which most people were oblivious. It was unsettling, and sometimes he would pass people on the street, or meet them in public when something deep inside him would reach out and connect with something inside them. It wasn't always pleasant, and sometimes it was with people that gave him the heebie-jeebies. But there was a connection there. A connection that was preternatural. One late October Friday evening, he and Hunter were sitting at Danaher's Folly sipping on Irish whiskey and kibitzing the dart games when a tall, lanky man with blonde hair and blue eyes walked into the pub. His eyes immediately went to the table where Kai and Hunter were sitting. With a nod, he picked his way through the crowd to their table. The first thing that Kai noticed about him was that he looked far younger than he expected. To Kai, he looked like he was no older than Shannon and Melissa. But there was something about his eyes that told a different story. Hello, Hunter, he said in a quiet voice. Kiernan, Hunter replied neutrally. What brings you here? I live here, Hunter. The question is what brings you? I'm on a mission from the gods, Hunter said with a straight face. The man named Kiernan suddenly looked over at Kai, and Kai could feel his eyes burrowing into him, as if he were studying Kai's own soul. There was the brief flash of the same feeling between him and Kiernan that gave the other man pause. He quickly turned back to Hunter and said, You play too many games, Hunter. Me? Hunter asked in surprise. I'm not the one who stood in line for 15 hours in order to snag a gaming console last year. That was different, the other man protested. It was for my great-grandnephew. What do you want, Kiernan? Catherine and Boone found out you've been in town for a couple of months and haven't contacted them. I'm here on personal business, Kiernan. It's not anything that should concern the Dubois family. Then as if he realized he was being rude, Hunter turned to Kai and said, I'm sorry. Kai Darrow, this is Kiernan Dubois. Kiernan, this is Kai. Kai nodded to the other man and offered his hand. It's good to meet you. When the other man took his hand to shake it, Kai felt a surge of power race up his arm and into his body. He fought to control it, but the other man seemed to be affected as well. Exactly where did you come from, Mr. Darrow? Kiernan asked. Northeastern Kentucky, Kai replied. Interesting. It's good to meet you, Kiernan answered his earlier greeting. What kind of mischief has this wandering vagabond been up to? Wandering vagabond? Kai asked, looking at Hunter. I'm sort of on a gap year, Hunter replied. I've been given a certain amount of time and money to explore the world until I have to buckle down and help run the family business. Must be nice, Kai said. Why didn't you tell me? Because I am enjoying my friendship with you. I didn't see any reason to bring up past unpleasantness. And there was the warning. Hunter respected Kai's boundaries, and now he was asking Kai to respect his as well. Now that is over and done with, Kiernan said. What about a game of darts? I'll pass, Hunter said. I know how you play games. Bad temper? Kai asked. He hates to lose. Which I don't do very often, the blonde replied. In that case, I think I'll pass too. Besides, I have no depth perception, so I'm not very good. No use in straining a friendship before it can get started. Interesting, Kiernan repeated his other comment. I'll keep that in mind. He then walked over into the oak and waited until the round was finished. He's a bit young to be in here, isn't he? Kiernan is like me, older than he looks. Just how old are you? Kai asked. Old enough to be in here, the raven-haired man told him. Kai smiled and said, Okay, I'll stop prying. Hunter just nodded and then leaned back in his chair. Tell me, what was your first impression of him when you shook his hand? Kai shrugged. There was a charge to him. It's something I've been feeling a lot since I moved down here from Kentucky. I take it you had some kind of serious injury up there? Hunter quickly added. I'm not trying to pry about the particulars, just pointing out that when I first met you, the waitress said something about you getting a cast removed. Something like that, Kai told him. I nearly died. Interesting. That's the third time tonight that particular word has been used. What's up? Just Kiernan showing up kind of caught me off guard. To be honest, it shouldn't have. He has a great nephew in the area that keeps him on his toes. So he said. What are your plans for tomorrow? Hunter asked. Nothing really. I was going to put in a couple of extra hours at work. There are some scenes that I'm not happy with and want to tweak. After that, I'm free. How about we meet up about 6 o'clock? There are some people I want you to meet. Why? Kai asked nervously. They are some local community leaders. They're the kind of networking contacts that can open a lot of doors for you here, in Gulf City. Okay, Kai said. Why do I get the feeling that you are setting me up for something? Because I am, Hunter replied. You know I'm not interested in dating anybody, Kai warned. Not that kind of setup, Hunter told him. Trust me, I've had enough of that over the years. It's not something I like or respect. These are genuine social and business opportunities. I think they'll do you some good. He smiled again and then added, Besides, it will help you come to understand what that surge was that nearly knocked you down when you shook hands with Kiernan. How did you know about that? Kai demanded. Because for just a second you were stunned. It was written all over your face. I think I've decided to help you to understand what all that is, and why Gulf City feels so strange to you sometimes. He took a deep breath and said, Actually, I know a lot more than you think I do. I haven't pressed it because the wound in your soul is still raw. You've been betrayed by someone you trusted, and now you don't trust anybody. How? Kai asked. Suddenly the fear and shame came washing back over him. For just a moment he was back in Chelsea's bedroom. The image of her and Sebastian swam through his vision. Then the blows. The sheer pain of the heartbreak combined with the beating made Kai physically ill. Excuse me, he said as he got up and raced to the men's room. He barely made it to the toilet in time to throw up his meal. Surprisingly, it wasn't Hunter who came into the men's room to check on him, but Kiernan. Hunter can do that to you sometimes. Do what? Kai fought back tears from the memories. Pick apart your soul and put it back together again. It's part and parcel with what he is. Why? Because he thinks you need it, Kiernan said. Don't ever think that he does anything out of malice. I've never met anyone who cares as deeply and strongly as Hunter. He's been through hell and back, but still sets his cap for helping people, especially those who've had their lives torn apart by some ordeal. You just happen to be one of his chosen, one of his shattered souls. Feeling the last heave of his stomach, Kai sat there in front of the toilet for long seconds to wait and see if there was anything else. Why? It's what he does. He's drawn to people who've been hurt, who need help, especially people who are as sensitive as you are. Sensitive? You felt something when you shook my hand. You probably felt something when you shook his too. People like us are drawn to each other. A very old and dear friend of mine says that we exist in between the cracks of reality. Gulf City just happens to be one of the larger cracks. Kai turned on the water at the sink and began washing his face. What are you going on about? You're like a child just being born. You can see the end of the womb, but you haven't quite left it yet. I suspect Hunter will be your midwife. Now you're making no sense at all, Kai said. I know, the blonde told him. I know, but you'll understand soon. When you are fully awake, you'll understand. I suspect he's going to introduce you to some people who will make things a bit clearer for you. If people like you and me walk between the cracks in reality, Hunter walks between realities. You'll see. Just hang in there a bit longer. Focus on yourself. Focus on building your own goals, on rebuilding your self-esteem, your own self-worth. The rest will come. Cryptic, Kai said. Cryptic comes from the Greek word meaning to hide or hidden. Soon you'll start to understand just how much is hidden. Kiernan smiled when Kai turned around and nodded toward the toilet bowl. Might want to flush that. Kai nodded and went back into the stall and flushed the toilet. Thanks. You're welcome. Then looking at him, he added, must have been some flashback. It was, Kai told him. Been there, done that. I understand completely. Something told Kai that the man was telling the truth. He really knew what it meant to be hurt as deeply as Kai was. 2 hours later, Kiernan walked into Lance McKnight's study at his home at Bon Travail and plopped down into the divan that sat in front of the window. Don't you ever knock? Lance asked. After reaching his adult age, he was no longer a dead ringer for Kiernan. Now, he was almost a carbon copy of Kiernan's eldest brother Boone. I've tried it on occasion. It's boring. His face became serious as he said, I'm sorry to hear about your dad. He was good people. He's going to be missed. Thank you, Lance said with genuine gratitude. Kiernan knew that the loss of his father had been weighing heavily on Lance's soul the past few months. For a moment, he was silent before finally asking more softly, What do you need, Kiernan? Me? He touched his chest. Nothing. You, however, need a warning. You have my attention, Lance said suddenly very seriously. That's what I like about you, nephew. Of all the members of our vast family, only you automatically take me seriously when I come to you with information. I would be stupid not to. What is it? You've got a couple of arcane issues in the city. Isn't that more of Marie Beaumare's wheelhouse? Usually, yes. Marie is very good at keeping the arcane and witchkin in line, but she's way out of her league dealing with Hunter Dare. And what is Hunter Dare doing in Gulf City? He's got a new shattered soul he's trying to awaken. Who? Some guy named Kai Darrow. He's from Kentucky. Lance just shook his head. Kiernan knew that Kentucky held bad memories for his nephew. Please tell me this isn't some fallout from that incident at the lake. Don't think so. But he has a lot of potential. Okay, Lance said. How much potential? If Hunter awakens him, he'll be on par with Catherine and Boone. Not the same witcheries, mind you, but he's nearly exploding with them. Wonderful, Lance said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Gets worse. How? He reads like Dare himself. Meaning? I'm not sure Dare is of this earth. Kiernan made little quotation marks with his fingers. You know how I can travel to other times, other realities? Yeah, it's always unnerving for the rest of us when we meet some alternate version of you. Well, in all of the realities, there is only one Hunter Dare. There are no analogs for him anywhere else in the multiverse. The same could be true of this kid. Kid? In his early 20s, Kiernan told him. Okay, just as long as nobody is robbing the cradle. Lance, I'm 200 plus years old. Almost everyone is a kid to me. Understood. What do you think I should do? Just be prepared. The guy is wounded. I mean big time, puke-causing flashback wounded. That kind of power under the influence of that kind of pain, as you know, can cause huge amounts of damage. Your other half here was an example. But that didn't happen. We merged, Lance said. Yeah, but this guy may not. He shook his head and said, I've got a bad feeling about things. What do you mean? Lance asked. Again, Kiernan knew that Lance would take what he said seriously. And that worried him almost as much as not telling him. I think that there's some outside force, some force that has nothing to do with the witchkin, the arcane, or the resolute. I think something else has started interfering in our world, and I think it began with you. You sure Westhall hasn't been able to put himself back together again? Who knows? We've destroyed him before, and he's come back. But I don't think this has anything to do with Westhall. Okay, I'm not sure what I can do about that. Neither am I, Kiernan said. I'm just relieved to tell someone who will take me seriously. I always take anyone in the family seriously. I know. That's why I come to you. The others still think of me as a 16-year-old that can't keep it in his pants. Well, not a 16-year-old, Lance teased him. I've been good. Kiernan protested. One of the things I've learned over the last 30-some-odd years is that seldom does the word good and our family go together. Doing what we do inevitably causes a taint on our souls. Hey, You are still an innocent babe compared to the rest of us. I just don't have the centuries under my belt yet, Lance said. Kiernan shook his head. Don't think you'll ever be quite as comfortable with murder and mayhem that the rest of us are. You may be right, Lance replied. But don't for 1 minute think that I won't do what needs to be done to protect the family. Yeah, but you usually find a way to deal with it without killing people. The occasional cryptid notwithstanding. So, any recommendations for what to do about Dare and his acolyte? Watch them. I suspect that Dare's going to introduce him to Marie soon. He's trying to awaken the sleeper. Should have never recommended that series of books to you, Lance said, shaking his head. But point taken. I'll keep an eye out for mischief. Good, Kiernan told him, rising from his seat. Now if you'll excuse me, I think I'll take a walk down to an old Irish town I'm quite fond of. Between strides, he faded away, leaving Lance wondering just how he and Kvaser pulled off that particular trick. Kai finished up the last pose for the scene, saved it to the render farm on the network, and set it to rendering. It was going to take a couple of days to finish, so he was free to work on another scene until it was done. When he was done, he grabbed his jacket as he dialed Hunter. He was looking forward to an answer to everything that had been said last night. When Hunter answered his phone, he said, I'm finishing up now. Where do you want me to meet you? I'm outside in the parking lot. How about we take your car? Fine with me, he answered. An hour later, they were pulling into a driveway located all the way over in the mobile section of the bay. It was one of the more upscale subdivisions, and the house was an actual antebellum plantation that had managed to survive the war and Reconstruction. This is it, Hunter told him as Kai parked the car. Who lives here? A woman named Marie Beaumare. She's very old and very wise, and nothing happens in this city that she doesn't either know about or have a hand in. Okay, Kai told him, stretching the last syllable. I told you I wanted to introduce you to some good networking contacts. But why? I mean, why me? Because I like you, and I think I may be able to help you with your future. Well, I appreciate it. Please don't think that I don't. I'm just a little wary of people right now. I know. That's why I think you need to meet Marie and a few others. They can open doors for you and your career. Out of the blue, Kai asked, what are shattered souls? Dare stopped for a moment and fixed Kai with his gaze. Kiernan used that term to describe you? Kai nodded. Yeah. The way Kiernan means it is people who've gone through soul-shattering trauma and who are either in the process of putting themselves back together or who have managed to do it. Someone I revere collects lost causes and helps them thrive. Me, I've been told that I do that with people I think have been treated poorly by the universe. When I see someone hurting, I want to help. I don't want to be anyone's charity case, Kai said. Dare whirled on him. And you're not. You're my friend and I like doing nice things for and with my friends. I didn't mean to offend. I'm sorry for snapping. Believe it or not, I understand your concern. I had it for myself for years, and it's taken a lot of hard work not to feel like that. I have another friend, a marine biologist who grew up feeling like that, and I don't wish it on anybody. It's okay, Kai said quietly. Dare stared at him, searching for something in Kai's face before he finally found what he was looking for. He nodded, smiled, and said, Come on, I'm about to blow your mind. He turned and pressed the doorbell. In less than a minute, a tall, balding man answered the door. Afternoon, Donaldson. Mrs. Beaumare is expecting us. As you say, you're... He stopped and looked between Kai and Hunter before finishing, Mr. Dare. Hunter just smiled and entered the door with Kai on his heels. This is Kai Darrow. He's the young man I wanted to introduce to Marie. As you say, sir. The home was huge, well cared for, and was the epitome of old wealth. Madam is in the drawing room. The other guests have yet to arrive. Thank you, Donaldson. Kai noted that Dare was exceedingly polite to the man as he directed them to a room with several sofas, chairs, and small tables scattered around. The hardwood floor was polished to a high gleam, and the walls were all tastefully done with a cream wallpaper with a small gold and crimson fleur-de-lis pattern. Standing next to the window was a woman who appeared to be somewhere in her late 30s to early 40s. She was wearing a gray skirt with a matching jacket and a red blouse under it. She had the air of a woman who was both wise and powerful. Hunter. The woman turned and held out her arms to the smaller man. Dare gave her a brief, chaste hug and turned to Kai. Marie, this is Kai Darrow. He's a friend. Anyone that you call a friend is indeed someone always welcome at my home. She turned to Kai, and her gaze seemed to study him down to his chromosomes. Kai, this is Marie Beaumare. It's my pleasure to meet you, Kai told her, shaking her hand lightly. He felt the same surge through his body that he'd felt last night with Kiernan. Something was awakening in his mind, and for just an instant there was the image of a great white cat pacing inside her soul. He blinked quickly to shed the image and saw her face returning to normal. She smiled and told him, "And mine, young Mr. Darrow. Please call me Kai." "Very well, Kai. I truly am pleased to meet you. Hunter has told me about your friendship with him. I'm glad that he's made friends here in the Bay. Perhaps he'll go wandering less often if he has friends to call him back." Then she indicated several chairs around a small table where sat a bronze and gold tea serving. "Please, join me for some small refreshments?" "Thank you," Hunter said as he staked out a seat, but did not sit until Mrs. Beaumere had. Kai followed suit and waited for the lady to sit as well. She smiled at the gesture, and Kai got the feeling that he'd just passed some kind of test. They sat nearly silent as Donaldson served the tea and croissants. When the large man exited the room and pulled the doors together, Mrs. Beaumere smiled and said, "Hunter was right to bring you here. You're nearly awake." "I don't understand," Kai said. The woman took a deep breath and said, "There exists in this world beings that are only known in legends and tales of phantasmagoria. Here in the mobile Gulf City Bay Area, there are quite a few of us. I am not so much a leader of us, but more of an authority figure. Most of the Witchkin know that if there are issues brewing in the community to bring them to me. I will help organize a solution and keep us all safe." "Witchkin?" Kai asked. "People who are different from the mortals around us. Some are shapeshifters, some are witches and wizards, some are fairies, and a plethora of every other kind of being to be found in fairy tales, horror stories, and folklore." Kai sat quietly listening to her. Was this woman really trying to get him to believe that there were fairies and vampires and werewolves in Gulf City? Next to him, Hunter smiled and nodded. "I don't mean to be rude, Mrs. Beaumere, but I'm having some difficulty grasping that there are things out there that go bump in the night. And you should. We do not exist in every town or city around the world, but only in a few special places where reality tends to bunch us up. Don't get me wrong. You can find us all over the world, but we tend to settle into a handful of places, and the Bay Area is one of them. And you think I'm one of them? I can sense your witcheries over here, Kai," she told him. "They are not yet fully awake, but I can sense them. I'll admit to some unusual dreams, some unexpected coincidences, but I think I should have to see something more spectacular to convince me." "How spectacular?" Hunter asked. "Nothing damaging, just something to convince my conscious mind." With a twinkle of mischief in his eye, Kai's dark-haired friend smiled and held out his hand. Before Kai's very eyes, long black fur sprouted from Hunter's fair skin. His hand shifted to become more paw-like and razor-sharp claws extended from the tips. Kai looked up to see his friend with a set of black-furred cat's ears at the top of his head. Hunter smiled through sharp fangs and said, "Sorry, but manifesting my tail in slacks can be uncomfortable." Kai felt his world suddenly begin to spin out of place. Even seeing it with his own eyes, his mind rebelled at the sight. This had to be some kind of special effects. But deep in his mind, he knew what he was seeing was for real. He reached out to touch the hand and then drew back before looking at Hunter and asking, "May I touch it?" Hunter chuckled at some inside joke and said, "Go ahead. There's more, of course, but this is all I'm comfortable showing you right now." Kai nodded and reached out to stroke the soft black fur on his friend's hand. Energy from the touch surged through his body, and deep somewhere in his mind and soul, he felt a door open, and something slowly escaped from inside him. Much to his surprise, he watched his own hand begin to bubble and shift before his eyes. It wasn't painful, but it felt like his bones were itching as his own hand matched that of his friend. What the hell? He yanked his hand back, and it began to return to its own form. Hunter and Mrs. Beaumere looked at each other. "Interesting," Mrs. Beaumere said. Then, she asked Hunter, "Did you do that?" "No, he did." "What just happened to me?" Kai asked. "I would say that some recent ordeal, injury, or near-death experience has brought your latent witcheries to the surface," Mrs. Beaumere told him. "Has something traumatic happened to you recently?" Images of kneeling on the floor, bloody and bruised, heart wounded and betrayed, suddenly swam in front of his eyes. Gone were the pleasant scents of tea and sandwiches. Gone was the elegant drawing room, and the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. In their place were the raw scents of sex, blood, and lavender candles, Chelsea's shattered bedroom, and the subdued hard slash of the morning sun pouring through the damaged section of the curtains. He felt the blows jackhammer into him, one after another as Bastion pounded him senseless. He felt the bone in his left arm snap from an attempt to block a kick to his face. All this was punctuated by the sounds of Chelsea crying and screaming. He struggled to rise, but his muscles refused to answer his will, and all he could do was ride it out. Each blow was punctuated by pain and force, and Kai wondered if he would die from them this time. Some small part of him wished it were so. He just wanted the pain, the shame, and the humiliation to end. Then, there was someone else in the room. A dark figure in the corner reached out with a hand, and the pummeling stopped. Kai tried to turn and look at the other man but could make out no detail. Kai could sense from him a deep, abiding sorrow and loneliness. Under that was a well of power like Kai had never sensed before. A black flame appeared in the hand of the shadowy figure, and he gently placed it in Kai's chest. Then looking up, he caught a glimpse of tears in the other man's eyes. The man turned to some unseen companion and said, "He is one of ours. Teach him. More will come later, but for now teach this one." Then, the scene was gone, and Mrs. Beaumere was attempting to rouse him. As the vignette with Hunter and Mrs. Beaumere returned to his attention, he saw his friend sitting in his chair looking a bit stunned. Kai nodded to the woman and said, "I'm very sorry, ma'am. I sort of blanked out there for a moment. Young man, I've been around long enough to recognize an unpleasant flashback when I see one." Kai looked down and apologized. "I'm very sorry. I probably shouldn't be here. Please forgive me." He rose to leave, but she took him by the arm and said, "You are exactly where you need to be, Mr. Darrow. You are with the people who can help you." Kai shook his head in despair and said, "Nobody can help me." "I can." Hunter finally spoke up. "And I can use your help too." "Hunter, I appreciate it. But to be honest, I don't think I can help myself, much less anyone else." "Think about what just happened with your arm," Mrs. Beaumere said. That simple question stopped him. Was it part of the hallucination? If so, how did she know about it? "You saw that?" he finally asked. "We both did," Hunter said. "It's part of what I've been trying to tell you. Whatever it was that recently happened has awoken something inside you. If you don't get control of it, you can become a monster, both literally and physically." Kai shook his head and said, "Hunter, I don't even know if I can trust anybody anymore. Want to tell me about it? See if we can get you past it?" Kai looked at Mrs. Beaumere and then back to Hunter and said, "No. What's been done can't be changed. I just have to live with it or not." "Kai?" There was worry and fear in Hunter's voice. Kai held up his hand and said, "I don't think this is the time and place to talk about this." "About the arm?" Hunter asked. Kai nodded and asked, "Do we have to do anything about it right now?" He felt he wasn't in the right mental state to deal with what he'd seen and felt just moments earlier. The flashback had taken him down a dark road in his mind. Hunter shook his head. "No, not now. But you really are going to need help with it. Tomorrow then?" "Tomorrow will work," Hunter replied. "Why don't you go ahead and go home? I can tell you're trying to process something. How will you get home?" Hunter just smiled and said, "Trust me, I can get home. How about we start with brunch at Danaher's Folly, say around 11? 11 at Danaher's Folly then," Hunter replied. Then turning to Mrs. Beaumere, he said again, "I'm sorry for ruining your afternoon." She chuckled and said, "Ruining my afternoon? You've delivered to me one of my favorite people in all the world and have left him in my evil clutches." She grinned wickedly. "I should be thanking you. But know this, you are welcome here anytime, Mr. Darrow." "Thank you." Then as if he was expecting this, Donaldson met him at the door to show him the way out. Kai felt bad about what had happened. He realized that no matter what his current feelings were, his actions were rude. But he found that feeling to be as empty as he himself was. The drive back across the bayway had cleared some of the cobwebs from his head, and he didn't feel like going home just yet. He needed to find a place to think. Reaching Gulf City, he turned south on 98, and then followed it east toward Pensacola. Spotting a little park in Lillian just before the bridge that crosses Perdido Bay, he turned off there. For a hot August day in South Alabama, the park was unusually empty. Only two boys with fishing rods stood shirtless on the edge of the water, casting out to where rows of wooden pylons marked where a pier used to be. They seemed to be doing well for themselves this day, despite the heat. He smiled at the innocence of youth and remembered his boyhood days, and how he'd spent many a long summer evening at the gravel pit in Raceland, fishing for bluegill, bass, catfish, and just about anything else that would bite. Pulling out his cell phone, he turned it off and found himself at one of the picnic tables in the shade. He climbed up on the table and sat with his legs on the seat, staring out at the boys fishing. His mind, however, was 1,000 miles away. It kept going back to that horrible scene in May when he'd walked in on Bastion and Chelsea. Mind movies began to play out of the scene. Then, as if spurred on by the pain and horror, his mind began to dredge up images of the two together at other times, of them together now. He'd always had a strong imagination, which was probably why he was so good at his job. And now that imagination was torturing his soul. He felt himself grip the thick wood of the bench next to him. As the movie in his head reached a crescendo, he shook himself out of the imagery and realized that his fingers had crushed the thick white oak of the picnic table and pulled a chunk out of either side with a loud crack. He looked down at the table sheepishly and wondered what had just happened. Then he looked around to see if anyone had seen him. The only other adult in the park was a young woman about his age who was walking a small black and tan miniature pinscher. She seemed oblivious to him, but even at 30 yards, he noted how pretty she was. She was tall, thin, and had her long blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. He couldn't make out her eyes from this distance, but he noticed that she filled out the cargo shorts and light blue blouse quite well. He chuckled to himself. One minute he was torturing himself with images of Chelsea and his brother, and the next he was admiring the beauty of a woman he'd never even met. His life was totally screwed up. Shaking his head, he got up from the bench, dropped the 2 pieces of wood in the garbage can and walked back to his car. When the engine flared to life, he couldn't resist gunning it for a couple seconds. He listened to it roar. He noted the blonde looked his way and then smiled. He pulled out of the parking lot and headed home in Silver Hill. He had a lot to consider. "That's a young man who's walking a razor's edge," Marie Beaumère said softly as she poured herself and Hunter another cup of tea. Hunter nodded and replied, "He is." "Did you see the flashback?" Again, Hunter nodded. "And it's going to be something very difficult to get around. He is afraid to tell anybody what is bothering him because it would be emasculating himself to people he barely knows." "I was afraid it was something like that. Do you have any idea how you're going to approach this?" "He definitely needs training. Based on his aura and what I saw today, the fact that his witcheries are flaring right now, and him being hurt like that could turn him into something terrible. We've asked Lance for far too much in his life. To ask him to put that man down would be a weight too much to add to his already overburdened soul. We're not going to have him put down." Hunter's voice was clear and firm. "He has been touched by Crehayer." "How do you know?" she asked. She did not understand this shadowy figure that Hunter claimed to serve. Crehayer was a legend lost to time, known to few, and served by even fewer. "I've seen it in his matrix, what you would call his aura," Hunter told her. "The Dark Father has touched him. He is more than just Witchkin. He's Dubharbianate." "I don't recognize the term," Marie told him. "It translates literally into shadow blessed, but the shadow in this case refers to Crehayer." Hunter smiled, showing all 4 of his canines elongated into fangs. "There are not many such beings touched by Crehayer, and it's my job to find them and to teach them and to guide them. Hence Kiernan calls them your shattered souls." Hunter chuckled and said, "Kiernan is a force unto himself." But essentially it is correct. Crehayer was born of betrayal, of agony, and of pain, and from that, he was forged into what he is. So are those who are his. They are born of betrayal and pain, and when he chooses them, they are made whole to serve his purpose. "That sounds almost religious," Marie told him. Hunter smiled and said, "That's because in many ways it is. There was an old movie that a friend of mine once showed me called The Magnificent Obsession. What those who are touched by Crehayer do is summed up by that movie quite well. Mind you, it's more of a philosophy for most people than a religion. Most of his actual worshippers only appear as human." "I seem to recall the movie, Rock Hudson and Jane Wyman," Marie answered. Then remembering the movie more fully, she added, "But in that movie, the magnificent obsession meant giving of yourself until nothing was left. That's why those who are Dubharbianate often have nearly limitless energy reserves. They have so much because they have so much to give." "Then I will watch his career with a great interest," she told him. "What will you do with him?" "Tomorrow, we begin to explore his witcheries, as you call them. After that, there will be small things for him to do to hone his control over them. I suspect he won't be ready to actually begin to make a difference in the world for a few years. There's a great pain in him that will have to be healed, and that won't come easily." "You've done this kind of thing before?" "Actually, this is my first time. Others have done what needed to be done in the past. Now it is my turn. My grandfather may have given me some time to explore, but that doesn't mean Crehayer will." "How long?" "Time I have from my grandfather?" Marie nodded. "Yes, considerably more than a mortal's lifespan. He basically told me to go out and forge my own destiny, to found an empire, and whatever I build for myself will remain mine when I am called back. This is just a minor hiccup in that time. Kiernan thinks you are gathering shattered souls as some kind of collection." Hunter laughed at the suggestion. "Kiernan thinks many foolish things, but in this case, he may be right. I find the idea of being a patron, guiding, and shaping someone to be better than they were before to be soothing to my own troubled soul." "I cannot imagine your soul being that troubled," she told him. He laughed aloud. "If you knew my family, you would think otherwise. Add to it, my particular dietary requirements and allergies, the fact that I'm manic-depressive, and my poor history with partners myself, I have more than a spot of trouble on my soul." Tom Darrow sat watching the wedding service. For such a happy event, there was a lot of bad blood in the room. Not only had both Shannon and Melissa turned down being best man and maid of honor, but both had also sent their regrets on being unable to attend. They had also refused to visit Tom and Grace since the day Sebastian asked Ruth to extend an invitation to Rain. Sebastian was standing alone with Chelsea at the altar. The small chapel was rather empty of people celebrating the wedding of his son and his fiancée. A smattering of people from the news station where Sebastian worked. Some of Chelsea's co-workers from Cheddar's were in attendance, but no other guests that weren't family. As for family, it was only himself, Grace, Sebastian's mother, Ruth, and Chelsea's parents, Bernice and Charles, all of whom had the demeanor of someone attending a wake. Even the bride and groom had a sad look on their faces. When the minister asked if there was anyone present who had reason for the bride and groom not to be married, Tom halfway expected Shannon or Melissa to walk into the room to object. It wasn't until the moment passed did he realize that everyone in the chapel was holding their breath. After that, there were the usual exchanges of the vows, the ring, the kiss, and the final presentation of Mr. and Mrs. Darrow. It was then, and only then, that he realized they'd finally gotten the two past the altar. There was a great deal of healing to be done in the family, and sorrowfully, he realized that could only be done with the absence of either Sebastian and Chelsea or Rain. Tom couldn't get away from the feeling that he'd somehow sacrificed two of his sons and a daughter in order to save his eldest's happiness. It was not a trade-off with which he was comfortable. Later at the reception, the mood of the room became more celebratory. There was the cutting of the cake, the dances, and the speeches. The latter were somewhat more muted, and then a toast to the couple. When it was finally over, Tom, Grace, Ruth, and the Bordens were left with the cleanup. It wasn't until the last guest had departed that Tom and Charles had an opportunity to talk. "I didn't think we were going to pull this off," Charles said. "I had my doubts myself," Tom told him. "Has there been any word from Rain?" Tom shook his head and said, "He disappeared the day he was released from the hospital. We suspect he's returned to Gainesville." He took a deep breath and leaned back on the table. "I feel like I've sacrificed one son for the other." Charles put a hand on his shoulder and said, "We really liked Rain. We'd hoped, no, we all believed, that today would have been for him and Chelsea. I can't tell you how sad and embarrassed I am about Chelsea's behavior." Tom nodded and said, "I feel the same way. Sebastian has disappointed us deeply. The only thing he's done right up to this point is to actually marry Chelsea and take responsibility for what they have done. No matter how we feel about what is and what should be, in the end, this baby needs both her parents." "Did you know that Chelsea snuck into the hospital room to see Rain?" Charles asked. Tom nodded. "Sebastian told me. I don't know if it helped or hurt the situation. Chelsea says that Rain was terrified of her, of Sebastian, and the thought that Sebastian might lose his temper on Shannon. I don't know. I think what he did broke Sebastian nearly as much as it did Rain. He started going to counseling for anger management. Chelsea told us that. And they're both seeing a marriage counselor," Charles said as they continued the cleanup from the reception. "Kind of strange to start your marriage off with counseling, but I think it might do them some good. It might actually keep them together." "Let's hope so," Charles said. "I still can't help but worry about Rain. He didn't deserve this, any of it. I know. I sort of feel like I'm betraying him, hurting him even more with being here at the wedding. But I can't completely shut out Sebastian and our granddaughter. Shannon made a good point a few days ago." "What?" "That Sebastian isn't my only child, and that I'm running the risk of not ever knowing other grandchildren in order to know this one." "What's that supposed to mean?" "He told me that with any luck Rain will eventually heal, but he may never return and may not let me have contact with whatever children he has." Charles nodded and said, "That's harsh. I know, but I can't say that it's not a possibility. I'm literally choosing one son over the other, and I'm choosing the one who betrayed the other. To be honest, it makes it more than a little difficult to sleep at night." I can imagine. Kai could not sleep. His mind was racing a mile a minute as thoughts of what happened today at Mrs. Beaumare's home, what Hunter had shown him, and the flashback. It was different, and in some ways not as painful as previous ones. He tried to distract himself from those thoughts by focusing on his work. He tried to remember the script he'd been given and how to best construct it for maximum impact on the viewer. But as he drifted towards sleep, his mind would shift back to the flashback. He would redirect his thoughts again, and this time it would jump to the scene in the Beaumare home. Again, he would refocus, and this time it would jump to the woman he saw in the park. That at least was better than his other results, so he let his mind flow with it. But then he'd start feeling guilty because it was someone other than Chelsea, and the cycle would start all over again. It was nearly 3 when his mind finally shut itself down, and he dreamed of fishing at the gravel pit as a boy. He awoke mid-morning the next day and felt a little better. He grabbed a quick shower, a change of clothes, and a cup of coffee and headed over to Danaher's Folly to meet Hunter. He was surprised when he got there and found the other man already there. "Morning, Hunter," he said, sliding onto a chair across the table from him. "Morning, Kai," Hunter replied. "How are you feeling today?" Kai smiled and answered, "Surprisingly well, all things considered." Hunter smiled and said, "Glad to hear it. I really do want to continue talking about what we were discussing yesterday." Kai smiled and said, "Me too. Just not here." "You're learning," Hunter replied as their regular waitress arrived and set down Kai's usual drink. "What can I get you gentlemen this morning?" "I'll have the New York strip, rare," Hunter told her. "What about you, Kai?" Kai was surprised that the woman remembered his name. "I'll have the seafood salad and a bowl of soup." Writing down their orders, she snapped her book shut and said, "Coming right up." She then smiled, turned and left. "Look, I'm sorry about yesterday. That wasn't one of my usual triggers. Have you talked to a therapist about whatever it was?" Kai shook his head. "No, and I really don't want to." "Why not?" Kai considered his answer for a few moments before finally saying, "Because it's beyond embarrassing. It's humiliating, and I don't want to live through that kind of humiliation again." "But your flashbacks force you to do that," Hunter protested. Kai nodded, sipped the cider in the glass before saying, "But with the flashbacks, I'm the only one who has to know." Kai knew it was a lame excuse, but had no desire for anyone else in the whole world to know what was done to him. How he'd been humiliated, cucked, and finally emasculated, and nearly literally so. He still had pain when he walked sometimes. "After brunch, where do you want to go to talk?" Hunter asked. "We can go to my place, or yours." Kai smiled and joked, "That could have other connotations." "Sorry, I didn't mean it that way. Although you are attractive, and if you weren't hurting right now, I might consider that, but we both know it would be a bad idea." Kai was taken by surprise by Hunter's candid answer. "I was joking. I'm straight." Hunter grinned and said, "I guess you could say I'm bi, but I didn't mean it like that." "It's cool," Kai told him. Then he ruefully added, "And to be honest, I couldn't take you up on it if I wanted to. I'm still healing." "Not a problem," Hunter told him. "How much of what I saw yesterday was real? Outside of your flashback, all of it." "I was afraid you were going to say something like that." He paused for a few moments before asking, "And were you serious when you suggested I could be a threat to other people's safety?" "Oh, definitely," Hunter replied. "But we'll talk about it further when we are somewhere we can't be overheard." "Understood." In the meantime, they talked of innocuous subjects and just enjoyed the late morning company. The food was good. The companionship was even better. It was well past noon when they paid their bill and were leaving the restaurant when Hunter asked, "Seriously, I would suggest either my place or yours for our discussion. I'm just up the road, in Silver Hill. You said you were downtown. It's 6 of one and half a dozen of another. Well, I'd rather you feel comfortable while we talk, so why don't we go to yours?" "I'll follow you," Hunter said as he walked up to a rust-orange new Dodge Charger. "Sounds good," Kai told him, admiring the car. He realized he probably needed to get a new car and put his Javelin in storage, but it was too much fun to drive. He climbed into his own car and started it up. The drive to his place didn't take long, and he had mixed feelings about it. He'd had no guests over to his apartment since moving in. It meant letting his guard down, and he was both nervous and excited about the idea. He felt it meant some kind of progress. He was also glad that since moving in, he'd been obsessively neat and tidy. It was one thing in his life he could control. As they entered the apartment, Kai asked Hunter, "Can I get you a cup of coffee?" "It would be appreciated," Hunter replied. Kai smiled and took a moment to prepare 2 cups. After handing his to Hunter, he took a seat in a red leather wingback chair he'd picked up at an antique shop. "Now about what happened yesterday." Hunter seemed rather at ease as he nodded and began, "How do you want to proceed? Do you need another demonstration? That would be helpful." Hunter stood, and his face relaxed. As it did, his features shifted and softened somewhat. Black Cat's ears appeared at the top of his head. A long black cat's tail snaked out from behind him. He smiled, revealing elongated and sharp upper and lower canines. "This is the form in which I was born, or pretty close to it. There are some differences that are personal, and I won't go into them. Now I can take the transformation further if you wish." Hunter swallowed and figured in for a penny, in for a pound. "Please." Hunter's form shifted and grew until he was nearly 8 feet of anthropomorphic black cat. His electric blue eyes blazed out from the dark fur of his face. Kai suddenly knew how a mouse felt under the cat's gaze. The transformation continued as the giant catman shifted down to half a ton of house cat the size of a tiger. Hunter heard a low purr escape from the huge animal's chest. Then it melted back up into Hunter's familiar form. Then, His form shifted again to that of their waitress at Danaher's Folly, and then to match Kai's own form. I'm a shapeshifter. Kai just swallowed and said, Are there many in the world? Hunter returned to his own form and said, More than you might think. But we tend to be bunched up in specific places. The Mobile Bay area just happens to be one. Kai chuckled and said, I'd have thought it would be New Orleans. Hunter shook his head and said, No. Most of the Witchkin in New Orleans tend to migrate either to here or to Port Arthur in Texas. There are several communities in California, the largest being in Redding, one in Nevada near Carson City, and one or two in the Midwest, several along the Appalachian Mountains, and the rest in Maine, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia. There are of course places in Europe, Africa, Asia, and South America. Those are the ones here in North America. That's not to say that there aren't one or two living in other places, but for the most part, the Witchkin get bunched up in places like this. I've heard these places described as cracks in reality, and the veil between this world and several others tend to be thinner in them, so it makes witcheries more potent. And you think I'm one of these Witchkin? Among other things, Hunter said. You are at least a shapeshifter if not a therianthrope, and after what we saw yesterday, I'd say you can mimic anyone you touch. Remembering yesterday, he asked, Does an increased strength come with it? It can. Why? Because yesterday, I tore 2 chunks out of a white oak picnic table without meaning to. I just snapped the plank. Were you having another flashback? Not so much flashback as my brain was working overtime to create new scenarios. Let me see your hands. Kai showed him his friend his hands. I'd say probably some durability too. Could have used both of those back about 3 months ago. Hunter shook his head and said, No, you couldn't. Although whatever altercation occurred may have turned out different, it would have probably ended in someone's death. Kai thought about that. What really worried him was that right now, he wouldn't care if it had. Right now, he felt that he could deal with the death of his brother with great aplomb. That realization brought him up short. Sheepishly, he said, I think I see what you mean. Hunter gestured back to the chair. Why don't we sit down and talk about things further? I'm sure you have a lot of questions. After we've talked about them, we'll discuss some kind of training regime for you. You don't want to walk around without your witcheries under control. You would be a danger to yourself and others. What kind of witchkin? Is that the right word? Are there? Just about anything you can think of from legend and a few that are unlike anything you might have heard of. There are werewolves and other kinds of therianthropes, witches, nixie, fae, several types of vampires, and some that defy description. You fall into the latter category. Those that defy description also tend to be among the most powerful. And Mrs. Beaumare? All I can tell you is that she has been part of the social scene of Mobile Bay since before the Civil War. Beyond that, you would have to ask her. Kai took a deep breath and tried to absorb it all. Finally, he said, Okay, I believe you. Now what do we do to make sure that I don't accidentally hurt myself or someone else? We begin the process of identifying exactly what your witcheries are, how they can be expanded, and how to best train them. Then, let's get started. Gladly, Hunter said, standing up. Here, take my hand. Why? We're going someplace where you can't hurt anybody else while we do that. Where? You'll see, Hunter said as Kai took his hand and the two faded away. Sebastian watched his new wife cry miserably on the bed in the honeymoon suite of a very upscale resort and spa in Lake Tahoe on the Nevada side of the lake. This had been their wedding day. It was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, but in reality, it was a bitter and solemn event that had left Sebastian tasting the cold ashes of a Pyrrhic victory. In the end, it was a victory he did not want, nor should have got. Joining her on the bed, he put an arm around her. She looked up and snuggled in against him. I'm sorry, I'm just a mess. This wasn't supposed to go like this. Maybe not, he told her. But it's what we have. I know you're hurting. I'm hurting too. I'm feeling guilty. I'm angry at myself, and I'm ashamed. But it's what we have. It's going to take a while to get over it, but together we can get through it. Together, we can build a life. She nodded, sniffled into the well-soaked tissue and said, Do you think we can? We have to. If not for us, if not for the baby, then for Rain. Our being together cost him more than us. We owe it to him to make it work. I hadn't thought about it that way, she said. It's a realization that has come to me over the last few weeks. Rain paid for this marriage with his own blood and pain. Blood and pain that we both extracted. If we don't make it work, then what we've done is for nothing. How we've hurt him is for nothing. And that is more than I can handle. He paused, pulled her chin up so that their eyes met. So, tell me what I can do to help you heal, to make this right with you. For now, just hold me. He put his arm around her and lay back on the bed, pulling her down with him. For nearly an hour they lay there, holding each other, comforting each other, trying to make things right in their minds, and finding some modicum of peace, if not happiness. Later, the snuggling became more intimate, and Sebastian realized that it was the first time they'd made love as man and wife, and the first time they'd been intimate since that horrible morning in May. Toward evening, the two showered, and then went downstairs to the dining room and ate dinner, talking of their plans as a newlywed couple. Chelsea's parents had gifted them as a wedding present a nice upscale house on East Calumet Drive back in Worthington. It was in a bend in the road, and the backyard had access to the opening of the slough from the Ohio River, where there was a community dock. Between his job at the television station and the house, they were going into their marriage with a couple of runs already under their belt. They were better off than most couples in this situation. Even their honeymoon had been paid for by his dad and Grace. "We haven't really talked about names," Chelsea finally said. Sebastian shook his head and said, "No. Do you have any ideas?" "A few." "You?" "Not really. I have some ideas, but I'm not sure they're good ones." "Not any version of Rain," she said firmly, shooting down his first idea. "Why not?" he asked tentatively. "Because I don't want our child to remind me of a very unpleasant situation. She deserves better than that." He nodded and found himself agreeing. "Maybe we need something from none of our families." "That might be a good idea." "How about Brooke or Brooklyn?" she suggested. "Those both sound good." "What ideas do you have?" "Tammy or Tabitha." "I like Tabitha," she said. "Tamara is okay, but between the two I like Tabitha." "How about Amber?" he suggested. "It's a bit common these days." "So's Brandy." Soon, the two were lost in picking a name for their daughter, and the pressure of the sadness and shame on their shoulders eased by a single straw's weight. That night, after an evening playing at the casino, they returned to their suite and made love again. Over the next several days, the two of them slowly found again what they'd lost on that horrible morning in May. They felt their love rekindle and begin to burn inside them again. It wasn't quite the roaring inferno it had been in May, but it was at least a warmth to both of their souls. By the time they returned to their home in eastern Kentucky, they had begun to heal. They started planning for the nursery and all the things that a newlywed couple expecting a child would do. It didn't take them long to settle into a comfortable life, only occasionally troubled by their past. December 2005. Nearly 5 months of training of focusing on himself, his goals, his work, his body, and the witcheries that Hunter had awakened in him, made Kai Darrow nearly a new man. He joined the gym and had become nearly obsessive about attending. He was toning up and getting really cut. He started taking mixed martial arts classes and found that he not only was good at them, but he enjoyed them. He even made a few friends in his fight circle. There were still some lasting effects from his ordeal, though. He still sometimes walked into things due to being blind in his left eye. It did give him a weak point in his MMA classes, and meant he would occasionally walk into a punch, but he was learning to compensate. He still felt the pangs of shame and humiliation that his brother had visited upon him, but the flashbacks had retreated, and he was coming out of his shell. Trust was still hard for him, and he'd allowed some few people into his circle of friends. It was one day at a time. He'd gotten his first promotion at work. His boss was impressed with his dedication and work ethic and had given him a few larger and more complicated scenes to work on. Again, his attention to detail had helped him make a name for himself. His renders took a bit longer, but that was because of the detail he'd added. Most of his work skirted the edge of the uncanny valley, but never went over into it. That was something about which he was very proud. He'd finally broken down and put his javelin in storage. It had become nearly a showpiece, and he didn't want to damage it with everyday driving. With his bonus that year, he bought for himself a royal blue 2005 Opel Speedster Turbo. It was just as much fun to drive as the Javelin, and it stood out. Kai was learning to be comfortable with himself, in his own skull. He was also learning to let go of the past, and work for himself, to put himself first, and to love himself. He finally came to grips with the fact that no matter what Sebastian and Chelsea had done, it was still their choice, not his, that led to it. The only thing he was responsible for was attacking Sebastian. Before and after that, their actions were theirs to own. "You seem to be thinking deep thoughts, my friend," Hunter said to him at Marie Beaumare's Christmas party. Kai turned to his friend and said, "I was just counting my blessings." Hunter raised an eyebrow. "You seem to have come a long way since I first met you at Danaher's Folly." Kai nodded and said, "I have. I'm still healing, but I'm getting better each day. That's all anyone can ask. I heard you got a new car." Kai smirked. "I was afraid I was going to damage the Javelin driving down here. Some of these people are crazy. I'm convinced that they think a turn signal means pass me on the indicated side." Hunter just laughed. "You may be right. You should try driving in Atlanta at rush hour." I'll pass, Kai said. So do you have any plans for the holiday? Not really. I don't have any family to visit, so I thought I might pop into the office and do a little work on our new project. Hunter shook his head. That will not do. You need to take a break, spend some time doing the things you love. Do you have plans for Christmas? My family celebrates the winter solstice. For us, it's very much like the Germanic Yule, but with our own gods and traditions. But I do intend to return home for a few weeks. It's been a while since I've seen my mother, and she's threatening to come looking for me if I don't. Mothers can be that way, Kai said wistfully. He missed his mother, but he still could not face her, face anybody in the family. He was afraid that it would dredge up the old pain, the hurt, and with them the flashbacks. He'd worked too hard to give all that up. Did I hear you say you didn't have plans for the solstice? Ryan Lee asked, inserting himself into their conversation. Kai knew Ryan from other gatherings with Mrs. Beaumere and knew he was part of the lycanthrope community in the Bay. Someone had mentioned that his family was rather prominent. Hello, Ryan, Hunter said. Hello, Hunter, the blonde replied. Then turning back to Kai, he said, seriously, Kai, if you don't have any plans for solstice night, I would consider it a great honor if you would join us. Nobody should be alone on the night of Hearn's wild hunt. I thought only Odin rode the wild hunt on solstice night, Kai said. Over the last few months, his knowledge of various pagan faiths had nearly exploded. Ryan grinned and said, yes, but my mother is a druid, a speakana, and a werewolf. My father is one of the hounds of the hunt she raised to kill her aunt who threatened her family. Trust me, we honor the wild hunt anytime it is appropriate. You'll have to forgive me. I'm still learning the various pagan religions. A druid is obviously Celtic, and speakana is Norse. Am I wrong? Not at all. But my mother was trained in as many magics as my grandmother could find teachers for her. She honors all the gods and uses her magic very carefully after she turned my father into one of the hounds of the hunt. Must be some story, Kai told him. Trust me, it is. It's a story I hear about 4 times a year, at least once at Yule, Beltane, Albahefen, and Samhain. My mother is very proud of that particular spell, especially since she imbued Lance McKnight with the power of Hearn on that evening. Kai had heard of McKnight, but had not had the opportunity to meet him. He knew he was a member of the local Witchkin community and a very well-respected man with a great deal of skill and power. I wouldn't want to intrude, Kai told him. Intrude? Mom and Dad would love to have you there. I appreciate the offer. Can I think about it? Please do, Kai. I know my family would be honored to have you. He handed Kai a card with his name and phone number on it. Here's my number. I hope you join us. Then he turned back to the crowd and said, if you'll excuse me, I see my sister is about to get into an argument with Pat d'Iberville. I'd better head this off at the pass before it gets nasty. The blonde man disappeared into the crowd. Who is his sister? Kai asked absent-mindedly. She's standing by the tree talking to the red-headed woman, Hunter told him. Kai turned his head and saw a very pretty, blonde woman he recognized having an intense discussion with a pretty redhead girl. The blonde was the woman he'd seen at the park on the day he'd first visited Marie Beaumere's house. Her hair was pulled back in the same ponytail, and she was wearing a pearl-colored blouse belted at the waist that hung over a long blue skirt. She had on a pair of dark blue pixie boots and had a cup of eggnog in her hand. Kai watched as Ryan approached her. They spoke for a moment, and then she looked over at Kai and smiled and waved. Kai smiled and waved back, and then her brother pulled her away from the redhead and then out of the room. He wondered about that but said nothing. You really should go, you know, Hunter told him. Turning his attention back to his companion, he asked, Huh, what? Hunter chuckled and said, You really should go to the Lees for solstice. I think you'd find quite a few possible friends your age there. I'm not sure, Kai said, watching the blonde retreat. I am, Hunter said with a smile. Chelsea Darrow née Borden was feeling fat, miserable, and wanted to get this child out of her body. She was already 2 weeks past due, and if she didn't go into labor the next few days, the doctor was going to have to induce it. This was the 3rd time she had to get up in the middle of the night and pee, and it was getting old. Tabitha had taken to tap dancing on Chelsea's bladder over the last few days, and it had reached a situation where she was forced to wear a pad. Getting up from the toilet, she flushed and then felt something wet and warm run down her leg. Looking down, for just a second, she wondered if she'd peed herself again, and then realized that the water soaking the bathroom floor was amniotic fluid. Sebastian, she called. Sebastian, wake up. Huh. Her husband rolled over and checked the clock. It's 1:30, Chelsea. What is it? We need to go to the hospital. A contraction hit her. Now. Ugh. She held her lower abdomen. Sebastian sat straight up in bed. What? My water just broke. Grab the go bag, and let's get to the car, she said, pulling on her housecoat. Got it, he replied, pulling on his jeans and shirt. He grabbed his keys and said, wait right here. I'm going to warm the car. Then, he grabbed his coat and headed outside calling, put on something warm. 2 minutes later, he was fussing over her like an old mother hen. Making sure she was bundled and warmed, he grabbed the bags and gently guided her out to the Altima. She couldn't help but notice how he had everything together. There was no panic in his voice, only concern for her, and for getting her to the hospital. The night air was cold and crisp, and she could see the waning gibbous moon in the sky. Ice crystals on the mailbox and in the air gave the night an unearthly glow, and as they made their way down Riverside Boulevard, she couldn't help but smile at his gentle and sure hand holding hers. The trip to Belafonte Hospital took under 5 minutes, and within half an hour, she was checked in and was in labor and delivery. While the nurses on duty got her prepped for delivery, Bastian had been filling out the admittance paperwork for her, so she'd been alone for nearly half an hour. She was scared and worried about the horror stories of pain that many women had warned her. Right as her fretting was about to get the best of her, Bastian walked in talking on his phone. We're in labor and delivery now. Will you call my dad and mom and let them know? There was a brief pause, and he said, thanks, Charles. Closing the phone, he came over and kissed her on the forehead. Everything is going to be okay, Chelsea. Again, he took her hand and held it as the nurses got her feet in the stirrups to check how far she was dilated. Her contractions had become strong and regular, and the nurse looked back at her and said, 9 centimeters. This baby is coming fast. Chelsea grunted at the pain and said, I thought I was going to get an epidural. By the time it takes effect, the baby will be here, the nurse told her, patting her hand. Then she looked at Sebastian and said, Dad, why don't you stand back next to Mama's head and hold her hand? That should keep the hitting down. Bastian smiled and did as he was told. I'll just do that. Time seemed to slow to a crawl as the pain and pressure built in her body. She'd always heard that first babies were the hardest and took the longest labor, but it seemed that little Tabitha felt she'd waited long enough. She had no idea how much time had passed when the nurse said, I can see her crowning. With Sebastian coaching her, and the nurse giving instructions, she pushed and relaxed, and as the pain and pressure built to nearly an unbearable crescendo, she found herself pounding the side of the bed with her free hand, as Bastian held her other one. She looked up at him and with fury in her eyes and voice, said, You did this to me. When we get out of here, you are never touching me again. She saw genuine fear in his eyes, as her pain and anger grew. She squeezed his hand until her nails bit into his flesh. All the time, he stood there, wiping her brow in silence and said nothing about the cracking of the bones in his hand. Sometime later, with a final push, she felt her daughter pass from her body. She's here, Bastian said with tears in his eyes. Our baby is here. He squeezed her hand tightly. No shit, Sherlock. Then the room was filled with the cries of her daughter, and she felt her eyes tear up. The nurse said, Time of birth 7:46 am. 5 minutes later, they were handing her little Tabitha while she delivered the afterbirth. Chelsea felt her heart race at the sight of her with thin black hair and ocean blue eyes. Bastian leaned over and kissed her on the forehead. You do good work. She looked up at her husband and felt her heart swell with love. I had help. An hour before sunrise, Kai sat straight up in bed. His gut twisted into a panic, and he suddenly felt like he was going to hurl. Flinging the covers off him, he barely made it to the toilet in time to lose last night's dinner. Suddenly, he flashed back to Chelsea's bedroom. His body shook and trembled as he relived the events. Not once, not twice, but his mind drug him through the vignette a total of 3 times before it released him, and he found himself lying on the cool tile of his bathroom floor. He finally gained control of his muscles and staggered from the bathroom, trying to figure out what had triggered such a strong flashback. Strangely enough, he didn't feel the usual malaise that followed one of these episodes. It was nearly cathartic, as if it had kicked the healing process into a new phase. He sat on his bed and tried to find out what had caused him to flashback and couldn't find anything. His dreams before awakening had been innocuous. He was dreaming of being out in the Gulf on a fishing boat. It was something he'd planned on doing this spring with his boss and a few other men from work. Finally, stripping, he went back into the bathroom, flushed the toilet, took care of other things, got a shower, and came out and turned on the television in his bedroom to get the local weather. The high was projected for the mid-50s with a low tonight in the upper 20s. He grabbed a sweater to wear over his shirt and went into the kitchen for breakfast. His phone buzzed. Looking down, he recognized the number and declined it. There was nothing he wanted to discuss with the person who'd called. He blocked the number as he pulled the ingredients for his morning meal from the fridge and the cabinet. He toyed with the idea of calling in today and spending it in doing some meditations to clear the cobwebs from his mind that the flashback had stirred up. In the end, he decided that with Christmas coming up this Sunday, it would be best to get a bit ahead on his workload. So, he walked into the offices of Gulf Coast Light and Magic at 8:30 and settled into his work area. He was deep into the scene when his boss came up to him and said, "Darrow, could you come to my office, please?" Kai set his work to save and followed his boss. Entering the office, the boss shut the door and said, "Darrow, you've been with our company less than a year, and I can't fault your work ethic, your talent, or your skill, and I can't say that about men and women who've been in this business since Tron." Kai's heart sank, and he asked, "There's an unspoken but in there, Mr. Jeffries?" His boss nodded his head and said, "Yes, there is, but I don't think it's what you think it is. Go on. We just signed a contract to do a major CGI motion picture from one of the big studios. I'm pulling you off the current project, and I want you involved with that one from the get-go. I want you to read the script, talk with the storyboard people, and the producer. This is a big project, Darrow. I've heard the budget is in the hundreds of millions of dollars. The director/producer wants it done with as much CGI as it can handle. You're going to have to invent new ways of rendering things. You won't be the overall lead on it, but you'll be my lead, and you'll be GCL and M's lead artist. This is a big project, and we don't expect it to be finished for nearly 4 years. Do you think you can handle that?" Kai smiled and said, "I'll do my best, sir. When do we start?" "I want you to fly to California January 2. Darlene will get your package together, and you'll spend a couple of weeks out there getting a feel for what the director wants, and then come back here and start the rendering. I'd like the big guy to get his first renders by the end of January." "Yes, sir," Kai told him. "In the meantime, I'll get as much of this project finished as I can. Who will I be turning it over to?" "Patricia." Kai raised an eyebrow. Patricia wasn't exactly one of the best artists on the team, but it was the boss's orders, so he'd let him handle it. "You'll still get your lead artist billing." "Thank you, sir," Kai told him. "No, Kai. Thank you for being exactly the kind of employee I needed." He smiled and said, "Go on and get back to work." "Yes, sir," Kai told him before heading back to his desk. For the rest of the day, he felt like he was walking on air. "She's perfectly adorable," Grace said, holding little Tabitha. "When can you bring her home?" "They said if everything checks out, tomorrow," Chelsea told her. "What a wonderful Christmas present." "I'm not sure how she's going to feel about that," Chelsea said. "You know how kids who have birthdays near Christmas complain of combined gifts. We'll just have to make sure she gets 2, Grace said, staring lovingly at her grandchild. "Where's Sebastian? He want to get something to eat. How about you and the baby?" "I ate just a bit ago, and the baby just finished nursing." Grace nodded and said, "I think I got a lead on Rain's location. I tried to call, but it went to voicemail. I left a message about the baby." Chelsea narrowed her eyes at Grace. "Why in the world would you do that?" "He needs to know he's an uncle," Grace told her. "Grace, there's something you need to understand. If there's going to be healing in the family, it's going to mean that either Sebastian and I can be part of it, or Rain can. Rain has decided to make it be himself that has to go. I don't like it, and Sebastian doesn't like it, but it's the only choice he has left. Sebastian and I have done enough to hurt him. We don't need to rub his face in it." "Who's rubbing?" "He needs to know he's an uncle." Chelsea was nearly in tears. "Did you ever stop to think that Rain wouldn't be happy about Tabitha? She's a reminder of what we did to him. You didn't do nothing to him. How can you say that? Why can Sebastian and I admit our guilt, and you can't?" "So, you had an affair. Families get over that all the time." Chelsea shook her head. "Not like this, Grace. Not with what Sebastian did. Rain attacked Sebastian and got his butt kicked for it. If anybody is at fault, it's Rain for attacking his brother." Chelsea could not believe her ears. Finally, she just looked at Grace and said, "Please don't try and contact Rain on our behalf again. If we want him to know, we'll tell him." Grace harumphed at her and went back to gazing adoringly at little Tabitha. Who couldn't love this precious little baby? Chelsea just bit her tongue. She was going to have a talk with Tom about this. Grace was going out of her way to cause even more damage. Why did it seem like there was always a dark spot on any day where she was supposed to be happy? She wondered if she'd ever be truly happy again. Before she could say anything else, Grace looked up at the wall clock and said, "Well, I'd better be scootin'. I have to be at work in half an hour." She kissed Tabitha and handed her back to her mommy. Chelsea shook her head and watched her retreat from the door. She was weeping openly when Sebastian came back in. "What's wrong, honey?" he asked. Chelsea felt a sudden sadness well up from her soul. "It's just too much," Chelsea told him. It's all so overpowering. What are you talking about? Bastian asked, taking his daughter from her. Chelsea grabbed one of those hospital tissues from the box beside the bed. It wasn't very soft and did little to dry up her tears. Grace tried to call Rain and tell him about the baby. She did what? Bastian asked louder than he meant to. In his arms, Tabitha began to squirm and cry. Shoo, Tabby. Don't cry. The child looked up and seemed to recognize her father and was soothed. She did what? He asked again, this time in a much softer voice. She got a number she thinks is Rain's. She called it and left a message on voicemail about Tabitha, Chelsea said. Can't I have just one special day without this coming back and haunting us? She was openly weeping at this point as she snatched 2 more tissues from the small cardboard box. I'll talk to Dad about it, he told her. Please do, she told him. I can't take much more of this. Talk to Dad about what? Tom Darrow asked from the door. Sebastian handed the baby back to his wife and said, let's talk outside. Okay, his dad replied cautiously. Chelsea watched the 2 men exit the hospital room and wondered how her life got so screwed up. Kai felt like he was on top of the world when he rang the bell at the Lee residence. The sounds of people talking with the instrumental strains of holiday music in the background could be heard outside the rather nice brick home in Silver Hill. I'll get it. He heard someone cry. 2 seconds later, Ryan opened the door and said, Kai, glad you could make it. He entered the house, and the pretty blonde he'd seen 2 weeks ago at Marie Beaumare's handed him a cup of eggnog. She smiled at him and said, Hi, I'm Chastel Lee. Even her name was pretty. Taking the eggnog, Kai replied, I'm Kai Darrow. Is that the Hawaiian, Gaelic, Basque, or Japanese, Kai? Would you believe the Gaelic? He smiled and answered, Around here, yeah. Most of the people I know at school who are Kais get it from Japanese anime in one form or another. Where are you in school? Gulf State University, she told him. I'm a senior in the nursing program. Well, it's my very great pleasure to meet you, Chastel. She laughed and said, I've seen you around. I think the last place was at Mrs. Beaumare's Christmas party. You were talking to Hunter Dare. I was. That's pretty rarefied air you're breathing around Hunter. I don't understand, Kai told her. Hunter is like my cousin, Lance. He's almost royalty among the Witchkin. Kai shrugged and said, He's my friend. Then count yourself lucky. I'd count myself just as lucky if I could count you as a friend too. Kai couldn't believe he just said that. Oh, you're smooth, she said with a smile as she put her arm through his and took him around the room. Let me introduce you to anybody you don't know. The first place she took him was to a couple that looked like they couldn't be out of their 30s. But Kai had learned a great deal of the Witchkin society in the last few months, and chief among those were that few people looked their actual age. He'd learned to look at their eyes and how they carry themselves. This couple looked close to their age, but he wasn't sure. Kai Darrow, this is my mom and dad, Cassandra and Robert Lee. He noticed the man was scrutinizing him closely, as the woman smiled and said, It's our pleasure to meet you, Mr. Darrow. Ryan has had many good things to say about you. Ryan? Chastel asked. Your brother? Her father said with a smile. The one you shared a womb with for 9 months? Oh, Chastel said. I guess I was having a blonde moment. I didn't realize you two were twins. Multiples run in the family, Chastel said. It's that rarefied blood that some people put so much stock in. Kai got the message. Lycanthropes tended to have litters. Small litters, but litters nonetheless. Come on, let me introduce you to my cousin. Well, he's my cousin twice removed if I understand these things. He's my great-uncle's son. I think that's right, he told her as she led him to a man who looked no older than Kai. This is my cousin, Lance McKnight. Lance, this is Kai Darrow. Hunter Dare's friend? The man asked. Evidently one of the best ways to be known in local Witchkin society is to know Hunter, Kai said. Now that you mention it, that's probably right. Nice to meet you, Kai. You too, Mr. McKnight. Call me Lance, the other man said, looking back and forth between Kai and Chastel. Lance, Kai said. If you'll excuse us, I think I'm being pulled somewhere else, he told the other man in amusement as Chastel dragged him away. Within an hour, he'd been introduced to a great many people, some of the names he even remembered. But what he remembered most about that evening was that he had a good time with a pretty girl who was interested enough in him that they exchanged phone numbers. It was a good day indeed. Melissa Darrow was in a funk. No matter how much she tried, she just couldn't get into the Christmas spirit, even with Bastian's new baby. There was still a high tension in the family, and Rain's absence was acutely felt as they settled around the table for Christmas dinner. Gifts had been exchanged, and of course the new baby had been the center of attention, but none of it could get Melissa to generate much more than a perfunctory smile. She missed her brother. Plain and simple. She missed Rain's easy laugh, his quick smile, and his sense of humor. When Grace looked at the empty chair at the table, shook her head and carried it out of the dining room, Melissa found that she'd completely lost her appetite. She wondered what her brother was doing for Christmas Day. Did he have anyone to exchange gifts with? Did he have friends? Was he eating Christmas dinner alone? All of it just welled up inside her until she put her napkin on the table and said, "Please excuse me. Where are you going?" Grace asked as they passed in the large doorway between the living room and dining room. "I don't feel like eating right now." "Melissa?" Grace asked as Melissa climbed the steps. "Where's she going?" She asked the people in the dining room. "Probably upstairs to her room," Shannon said. "I'll make her a plate and take it up to her later." That was the last thing she heard before closing the door to her room and throwing herself onto her bed, crying. Thoughts of Rain being alone for Christmas haunted her, and she felt the anger that had been buried over the months leading up to Tabitha's birth had suddenly come boiling up in her. She felt tears well up in her eyes, and she turned over onto her stomach and wept into her pillow. She had no idea how much time had passed, but the December shadows had lengthened into night when a knock at her door pulled her out of a fitful sleep. Surprisingly, it was her dad that entered, carrying a plate and a glass. "Hi, Missy. I thought you might want something to eat." She looked up at her father and shook her head. "No, thank you." Coming into the room, he shut the door, set the plate down on her dresser, and pulled up a chair from the vanity. "You need to eat something." She shook her head and said, "If I try, it'll just come right back up." "Want to tell me what's bothering you?" "You know what's bothering me," she told him. "I know, Peanut, but sometimes it helps to put it into words. It gives it form, makes it real so we can deal with it." She just shook her head. "It's not fair. Rain didn't do anything wrong, and he's the one that has to go away just because Chelsea gets knocked up. It should have been Rain at the table, not Bastion and that little slew." "Melissa," her dad warned. "You know what I mean. Why does Bastion get a free pass just because he didn't use a condom? Life is often not fair, Peanut. And heaven help us, this is one of those cases. What Bastion did to your brother is beyond contemptible. It was horrendous, and I can't understand how one brother could do that to another. But it would also not be fair, even less unfair really, if we made Tabitha pay the price for her parents' stupidity." Melissa smiled. "That's the first time I've heard you criticize Sebastian for his part in this. I try not to criticize any of my children, and if I do, only to them. But this is sort of a special case. I'm just worried about him," she said. "Is he spending Christmas alone? Is there anybody to buy him a gift, or him to give one to? Is he eating a real Christmas dinner, or is he sitting alone somewhere? I don't know, Peanut, and I have exactly the same worries." And Grace isn't helping. She told Chelsea that all of this was Rain's fault for not being here, and for attacking Sebastian. She couldn't understand how Rain could not be happy about the baby. "Dad, she's stupid on a whole new level." Her dad nodded his head. "Not stupid, and not even uncaring. She just sees the world the way she wants to no matter what reality is. I talked to her about that, and she seems totally oblivious to what she's saying." Melissa set her jaw and then said, "If she ever says something like that in front of me, whether she's your wife or not, I'm going to pop her in the mouth. I really wish you wouldn't, Missy. Having one of my kids not talking to me is bad enough. I don't want to lose another one. You need to let go of this anger. It's not doing you any good. It doesn't do Rain any good, and it's not good for the family. Neither was Sebastian having an affair with Rain's girlfriend. Neither was Curb stomping him. Why do I have to bend my feelings for the family, and they don't? Tabitha," her dad told her bluntly, "because that little baby doesn't deserve to be held accountable for what her parents did." Melissa nodded her head and said, "I know. It just hit me hard today." "Me too, Peanut. Me too. I'll be away until the 11th, Kai told Chastel. The two had been spending most of the last week together, talking, going to movies together, and just being together. Of course, they hadn't taken their relationship to a physical level yet, and Kai wasn't sure when he would be ready for that. Much to his surprise, Chastel had told him that waiting was perfectly fine with her. She wasn't in a hurry. "Maybe we can get some dinner on the 12th? Smiling, Chastel shook her head and said, "Can't. 12th through the 15th is the full moon. I can't believe I'm having to adjust my dating schedule around the phases of the moon because my girlfriend is a werewolf," he told her softly. "Girlfriend?" she asked. "Does this mean we're exclusive?" "I am," he told her. "It's not because I'm getting attached too early, just that I can only handle one relationship at a time. My dating history has not been good." She smiled and said, "I think I understand. We'll go slow. I'm not looking for anything you're not ready to give." He smiled and said, "I appreciate that." Then pausing, he asked, "Just a question, and if you don't want to answer it, that's fine. I'm just wondering how dangerous you are on the full moon? She frowned and said, I'm not sure. Ryan, Mom, and my grandmother along with Dad usually help keep each other in check. We've sort of formed our own pack. We've been fortunate enough that we have access to a forested area to run and hunt without encountering people. And the fact that Dad can keep up with us helps. Exactly what is the situation there? I mean, how does someone who isn't a werewolf keep up with you guys? Chastel blushed and smiled before saying, would you believe Mom turned him into one of Hearn's hounds of the hunt the first night she met him? What did he do to warrant that? From what I'm told, he was available, and that's what counted. He and 3 of his friends, plus Lance's pit bull named Brandy, got turned into the hounds. Lance got possessed by the spirit of the hunt, and none of them are willing to talk much about it. But it did imbue the non-witchkin involved with witcheries of their own. Increased speed, durability, strength, and senses. That sort of thing. And Brandy is the only 30-year-old pit bull in existence. Your family dynamics are interesting. You haven't told me much about your family, she prodded him. I don't really have any family that I claim anymore. Must have been some ruckus, she said. Kai nodded and said, it was. I guess one day I'm going to have to tell you about it. Just not today, she said with a smile and a tap to his nose with her finger. So, what are you doing in LA for 9 days? It's work-related. I'm going to meet with some producers, directors, and writers for a new project we just got. They're telling me it's going to be a 3 or 4-year-long project. Sounds like a big opportunity for you. Trust me, it is. My work, Hunter, and you are about the only things that have gone well this year. At least you're counting your blessings and not your failures, she said. He smiled, nodded and said, down that path lies madness. She laughed at him and said, I'm glad to see you can make light of it. Of what? Of whatever hurt you, she said. He just smiled wanly and said, well, if not dinner, how about lunch? When? On the 12th, he told her. I could do lunch on the 12th. I'll definitely run it off that night. Seriously, what would happen to someone you might run across on a full moon? She stopped and said, most people just get the living crap scared out of them. Most of us have enough control not to attack people. But our own mood can affect that and make us more irritable. Most people who are bitten get that way usually because they come across one of us in a bad mood or a family. What about other witchkin? I mean, your dad hasn't become a werewolf, too, has he? Shaking her head, she said, no. Most witcheries protect a person from becoming a therianthrope. So my own witcheries should keep me safe? He asked. Depends on what they are. Hunter calls me panthropic. I can look like anybody I want to. If I touch them first, I can do it down to a cellular level. I can also add non-human features. I'm more durable, stronger, and have sharper senses than most people. And I can make duplicates of myself. Duplicates? How? I can split myself into up to 4 people. Each of them has all my memories and my witcheries, except I'm the only one who can duplicate. Anything else? We're still exploring one witchery. Hunter says it's very dangerous and that I need to study for years before trying to use it. He calls it world walking. Really? She asked, surprise in her tone. Yeah. I'm not comfortable with it, so I'm going to defer to him about it. Sounds like a good idea. But it does suggest that there's a Dubois somewhere in the woodpile. What do you mean? At least 3 of the original Dubois, plus the father have, or had parts of that combination. I don't know how to find out, he told her. Like I said, I don't claim any of my family. Well, it's not like you have to know. I was just pointing it out to you. Maybe you can mention it to Hunter or Lance. He smiled and said, I'll try to remember that. January 2007. Kai ran through the forest with an abandon he did not know he could feel. To one side ran Mr. and Mrs. Lee. Mr. Lee was in the form of a huge black dog breathing green fire, and her as a golden-furred wolf. On the other were Chastel and Ryan, each of them in their man-wolf form. The latter were between 7 and 8 feet tall, with blonde fur to match their mother's. Huge fangs filled their mouths, and there were 4-inch claws on their hands. Their feet were digitigrade where they ran on their toes, giving them the appearance that their knees were on backward. Kai felt the wind in his hair as he raced through the forest between the Tombigbee and Alabama rivers. Following the lead of the pack, they chased each other, a few deer, and the occasional bear up and down the forest trails, through the bushes, kicking up the rich black Alabama dirt. He was expending vast amounts of energy as he ran and leaped like some character from a Japanese anime, making 30 and 40 feet leaps. He suspected he was pushing 40 through the underbrush and close to 60 in the straightaways. He knew on open terrain he could do nearly twice that, but this wasn't open terrain. The wolves took his exuberance as a challenge, and they all bobbed and weaved through the forest, pushing themselves to the edge of the proverbial envelope. Sometime, well after midnight, they stopped at a spring that bubbled up from the ground and drank the clear, pure water before lying down near the large water oak trees that surrounded the glade. As Kai waited his turn to squat next to the spring, he noticed Ryan was watching him through lidded eyes, as if he were waiting for something. As he bent down to drink, he was suddenly tackled by the large man-wolf, and the two went tumbling around the clearing. Kai instinctively knew this was play, not a real fight, as the bites and claw swipes were not meant to do damage, but instead to challenge, riposte, dodge, and parry. Ryan was strong, monstrously so, but Kai found himself able to match him erg for erg of strength until the huge beast twisted his body nearly 180 degrees and pinned Kai to the ground. The werbeast dropped its face close to his and growled lowly. It was a menacing warning that Kai should roll and bare his throat. Kai understood. This was about dominance. With a shake of his head, he pulled his feet up under him and pushed off Ryan's hips. It had the desired effect in that it slung Ryan off him in one direction, while propelling Kai out from under the wolf's fangs. A quick shoulder roll, and he was back on his feet, as Ryan found himself lying flat on his face. Kai leapt toward the wolf, grabbed an arm, and flipped him over. Then with a twist of his body, he straddled the wolf's chest and leaned down into his face and growled at his girlfriend's brother. The next thing he knew, Chastel hit him from the side, carrying him off her brother, as they began to wrestle across the soft moss of the clearing. This confused Kai. This wasn't the same kind of wrestling. There was far too much body-to-body contact between them, and the straining felt more stimulating than subduing. Then, as quick as it had begun, it was over and the twins were back to their previous places, resting on the turf. This time Kai was very wary of both of them as he drank from the spring. He heard Mrs. Lee next to her husband chuffing as if she was amused. He wasn't sure, but he thought she was laughing at them. He got the distinct feeling of cubs playing off her. He just shook his head and sat down with his back to a tree. It wasn't long before Chastel came over to where he was lying and settled in beside him. With a smile, he reached out and stroked her golden fur. He absently began to pick small sticks and burrs from her and tossed them to the side. She leaned into him, and all was well. Much to his surprise, they lay there until nearly sunup. They left with just barely enough time for them to get to their clothing before they began to shift back into their human forms, in what appeared to be a painful transformation. There was the audible sound of bones breaking and snapping back into place, and little whimpers of pain as their bodies resumed a more human shape. Then it was as if nothing had ever happened. Each of them got dressed, and they all piled into the car without a word, started it up and headed home. Not wanting to break the silence with questions, Kai followed suit in his own automobile. This had been a remarkable night, and one that he suspected, if things continued apace, might become a regular event for him. It felt like he'd gone from pack friend to pack. It felt good. Things are tight right now with just Sebastian working, but we're making it. I don't know what we'd do if the car and the house weren't paid off, Chelsea told her mom. Thank you for that, by the way. How is little Tabitha doing? She's starting to figure out how to get from one place to another by holding onto the furniture, to by running from one piece to the next. Sebastian had to baby-proof the living room and dining room. Is Sebastian still liking his job? Yeah. He was offered a promotion, but that meant moving from here to Louisville, and we didn't want to do that. The extra money would have just been eaten up by rent. I understand. A lot of people from around here feel that way. Jobs and pay may be better somewhere else, but this is home, and people don't want to leave it. Yeah, I heard that they were talking about another round of layoffs at AK Steel. That's going to put a dent in the local economy. Her mother chuckled. What's so funny? Smiling, her mother replied, My little girl is sounding so all grown up now. Chelsea sighed and said, I had to grow up. Yes, you did, her mother said. But it was with love and maybe a hint of sadness, not the recrimination she heard just a few years ago. Did I tell you that Sebastian got a 6-point buck this last weekend? As a matter of fact, you didn't. Well, half of it's going to the butcher and the other half goes in our freezer. That means some extra meat later in the year. Where's he hunting? Out on the Industrial Parkway connector. He's got a friend who bought some acreage out there and lets a few close friends hunt it. She laughed. He calls it doing his part to keep the insurance fees on the connector down. The area was notorious for deer running out onto the highway, tearing cars all to pieces. Have you spoken with Melissa or Shannon since they moved out from Tom's and Grace's? No. Shannon went to the University of Kentucky in Lexington, and Melissa got a scholarship to Transylvania. I think they're sharing an apartment on New Circle Road. I bet Tom's and Grace's place is as quiet as ours, her mom told her wistfully. You're welcome to come over here anytime. I'm sure Tabitha would love to see her Mimi more often. True. And it might give you a break. Have you thought about going back to work? Right now, that's up in the air. Tabitha's only a year old. We've talked about going back to work once she's old enough for school. If I can get the financial aid, I'm thinking of going back to school first. I'm only one semester of classes and one semester of student teaching away from a high school math certification. Teaching jobs are hard to come by around here, her mother said warily. That's why I went into math. The problem is that we fall into that donut hole of finances. Sebastian makes too much at the station for me to get financial aid, but not enough for me to be able to afford the tuition. I really don't want to go into any more debt. But if we could swing it, then that would be 2 substantial paychecks and we'd be in a better place financially. Back when I was still in school, everything looked great. Both Rain and I were going to have good paying careers. We were going to have the flexibility to move for work, and our whole lives were ahead of us. Now it's diapers, morning feeding, and having to decide between cable or internet access. Her mother shook her head and said, "Now that's something you need to put out of your head. Whatever you and Rain had planned needs to never be mentioned again. It's not fair to Sebastian, and it's not fair to Tabitha, and it's not fair to you. You are where you are because of your own choices." Now what I'm going to say, I'm saying out of love, not out of trying to rub salt in an open wound. Cheating was not a mistake. A mistake is dialing the wrong number. It wasn't just a single choice. It was 1,000 little choices you made up to the point that you and Sebastian went from being 2 people who loved Rain to being 2 people who loved each other and what they wanted more than they loved their fiancé and brother. You can't sit and wish for what will never be. You have to deal with the cards you've dealt yourself. I know, Chelsea said. I don't think you do, her mother replied. What I'm trying to say is that focusing on what you could have had instead of what you have can lead you to make the same mistake again. It can make you dissatisfied with what you have with Sebastian, which by all accounts is damn good, and go looking for more with someone else. There's an old saying that I'm sure more than one person has told Sebastian. If she'll cheat with you, she'll cheat on you. You're going to have to spend the rest of your life making sure that Sebastian doesn't feel like you are going to walk away. It was something that Chelsea had heard before, but it had never been put quite so bluntly, quite so plainly. Her mother was right. She couldn't afford to go down that road. From that day forward, she was going to have to stay on guard against such thoughts. It was a sobering realization. It had been a good year for Kai. He'd gotten settled into his new role as an artist for the new project, and his boss had been right. It was going to be an epic movie, told like no other movie had ever been told. The plot was a variation on a common theme, but some of the best movies were. It was all in how it was executed. His relationship with Chastel had moved ahead steadily as his mind, body, and soul healed itself. Last week, he'd even run with her pack on the full moon. It was a bonding experience, not only with her, but with her family. It was as if they were saying that they accepted him. Hunter had teased him about it later, but he found that was a welcome change. As for Chastel, she graduated and taken her boards and was now working at the Gulf City Memorial Hospital over in Daphne. Now, he and Chastel were lying back on the sofa in his living room watching a cold winter rain spread across the bay. He was on the inside snuggling her from behind as a muted football game silently played on the television. All that seemed to matter to him and Chastel at this moment was that they were together. He smiled and said, "Chaz, I need to ask you something." "Go ahead," she told him. "I need to tell you something before you answer me. Can you hear me out?" Sensing the seriousness of his tone, she sat up and curled her feet under her at the other end of the sofa, giving him a nod and her complete attention. "I'm listening. Let me say that this is going to be hard for me. It comes from when I was in a dark place, but I have to tell you about it if I'm going to move on. But to be honest, I'm afraid that you will lose respect for me, or even leave me if I do." "You haven't cheated on me," she said. It was a statement of a fact, not a question. He shook his head and said, "Heavens no." Taking a deep breath, he added, "We've both made it clear that cheating is an automatic deal breaker. You don't know how happy I am about that boundary. So what is it?" He fought to control his emotions. Just the memory of the things he was going to tell her was painful. Taking a deep breath, he began. "There was this girl, Chelsea. We dated all through high school, and when I went off to Gainesville to college, we continued a long-distance relationship. She was already nearly part of the family as we'd been visiting each other's houses for the holidays since we were sophomores in high school. All my family knew her and loved her, and her parents knew me, and I think they loved me too. I thought things were good between us. We had been intimate since we were seniors, and that continued over the summers and various school breaks. We always used protection. That is until my college senior year spring break. I came home and she was cold to me. She would barely let me kiss her, much less love her. It should have been a red flag that things weren't right, but I was 22 and in love." "Go on," Chastel said neutrally. He could tell she wasn't passing judgment, but was simply encouraging him to continue his tale. At the time, I thought she was the most beautiful woman in the world. He smiled ruefully and then added, I didn't know what beautiful was until that day I saw you in the park with Buffy. Good save, she said with a smile. He chuckled and continued. I was young. That was the only serious relationship I'd ever been in, and I didn't know what kinds of warning signs I should have been looking for. Besides, I was stressed over school. It was my last semester. I had a killer project I needed to finish, and I had already talked with my current boss about coming to work for them when I graduated. Well, about a little over 2 weeks before the end of school, I'd finished all my projects, which counted as my finals, and I'd already signed a contract with Gulf City Light and Magic. So, I figured I'd go home. I bought a ring that Chelsea had pointed out that she liked, and I was going to propose. I drove through the night to get there before her day started. I wanted everything to start out on the right foot. I can see where this is going. I'm sure you can, he told her. I slipped into the apartment and down to the bedroom where I was going to surprise her. But you were the one surprised? Chastel offered sadly. Yeah, big time. I caught her and my older brother in the act. I lost my cool, and I attacked him. I hope you kicked his butt good. Kai looked down, tears in his eyes. I was stupid. I got distracted. Sebastian had 50 pounds of hard muscle on me. He nearly beat me to death, and then just walked out of the room coldly, telling me we could have talked it out. What happened after that? I tried to stagger out the door, but Chelsea kept getting in my way, trying to plead with me not to leave. Somehow, I managed to get out to my car and drive off. I don't know where I was going. I just needed to get away from anybody who knew what had happened, what had been done to me. I was humiliated, emasculated, nearly literally so. That's why you only have one testicle? Chastel asked. Yeah. And why I have this scar? He pointed to his arm where the bone had poked through the flesh when it was broken. And why I'm blind in my left eye. A bone fragment broke off and severed my optic nerve. Go on, she said, without judgment. I made it to a nearby state park and staggered into the woods. They found me the next morning and took me to the hospital. I was nearly dead from exposure and my wounds. The doctors managed to piece most of my body back together. But not your spirit? He nodded, tears nearly standing in his eyes. I refused to see anybody, talk to anybody, or press charges. When I was healed up enough to make the drive, I cut all my ties with my family and came straight here, where you met Hunter Dare, and he helped patch the rest of you back together. It was a statement. But why didn't you want to talk to your family? He shook his head and said, because I knew they knew what had happened to me, what had been done to me. They knew how Sebastian had humiliated me, how he'd not only taken my girlfriend from me, but had beaten me physically when I tried to do something about it. I couldn't face them with that knowledge. She nodded and said, I can't say that I understand. What you're describing is something definitely tied to being a man, but I don't think less of you for it. She sighed and then asked, did you ever find out how it started? He shook his head and told her, no. Chelsea snuck into my hospital room not long before I left, wanting me to forgive her. I hope you didn't, Ches told him, this time with iron in her voice. He shook his head, no. I told her I couldn't give her what she needed. She told me she was pregnant, and that was why she wouldn't sleep with me during spring break. She didn't want to be unfaithful to my brother. I'm sorry, but your girlfriend sounds like the original werbitch from hell. Kai smiled weakly. I wouldn't argue that. Now what is it that you had to drag yourself through your own personal hell and tell me all that in order to ask me? Kai rolled off the sofa, and Ni walked to her end. Taking one of her hands in his, he pulled from his pocket a box. Chastel, will you marry me? He opened the box and handed it to her. She took the box and looked at the ring inside. It's beautiful. It was a larger stone than the one he'd bought for Chelsea, with a crescent moon on each side of the stone. Then there were 2 more inset stones on each side. It was all set in a platinum ring. The rule of thumb was an engagement ring should cost 3 months' salary. Kai had a very good salary. Well, what? Will you spend the rest of our lives with me? Unable to speak for a few moments, she looked at the ring and then back at Kai. Then with a nod, she threw herself in his arms with a cry of, yes. Look, Shannon, can we talk? I'll buy you lunch. Sebastian asked his baby brother over the phone. Bastian's job had sent him to Lexington on a story, and he had a couple of hours for lunch. About what? Shannon asked warily. About how I screwed up. About how everything went down. I want to clear the air. I hate the fact that we don't talk anymore. We stopped talking long before you screwed up. Sebastian nodded and said, I know. But to be honest, neither of us should have taken sides when Mom and Dad split up. It wasn't the splitting up, it was how they split up and what Dad did right after. It took Melissa and me a long time to reach the point where we would even consider going to Dad for his half of the visitation. Then he married Grace the day after their divorce was final. Sebastian, you really have a problem seeing clearly when it comes to loyalty. Sebastian wanted to snap back, to say something equally hurtful, but he was trying to stop that. His long sessions with his therapist tried to get him to realize he needed to learn to accept when and where he made mistakes and to let people criticize him for them. I understand that. I know that you and Melissa feel that way, and I'm not saying you shouldn't. That would be a first, Shannon told him. I'm trying, Shannon. I'm trying. I'm not asking you to even meet me halfway. I'm just asking you to meet me. There's this huge hole in my heart and in my family, and I'm trying to fill it back as much as I can. That's going to be difficult, if not impossible, Shannon said. Then, he quickly added, and I'm not saying that to bust your chops, but we both know that some things can't be healed. I know, but I'm trying to heal what I can. Would you please just meet with me for lunch? I'm free until 2. Will that work? Yeah. Where? How about Tufflin Downs? Pricey, Shannon said. I'm a college student. I'm paying, Bastian told him. You've got a toddler. You're in even less shape to pay. I've got an expense account for this. In that case, when do you want to meet? I got reservations for noon. You knew I was going to say yes? Shannon asked. Not really. I've still got to eat while I'm in town. Fair enough. I'll see you then. 2 hours later, the two men were settling into a table. After the waiter took their order, Shannon looked over at Bastian and said, You wanted to talk. Look, bro, what do I need to do to make things right between us? I know I screwed up things royally, but I'm trying to at least fix the things I can fix. Shannon thought a moment and asked, Stand perfectly still while Rain beats you to a pulp? If I could find him, don't you think I wouldn't offer? I don't know if you would or not. I guess none of us ever will know. Or at least not until he pops up on our radar again. That's the thing, Bastian. You broke something that can't be fixed. No amount of money can fix it. No amount of saying I'm sorry. And no amount of restitution could ever make things right. If you hadn't fought back, if you hadn't curb-stomped Rain, it might be fixable. But you went over the line. You rubbed his face in it. I don't think Rain is ever going to want anything to do with any of us again. Then what can I do between us? Bastian asked. Take Rain out of the mixture. The only thing I can think of is to get Rain at least back in the rest of our lives. You see, what you did not only hurt him, it hurt the rest of us, because he's so ashamed of what you did to him. It wasn't just you who lost a brother. It was me, and it was Melissa. Mom and Dad lost a son, just as sure as if you'd killed him. If I could, I would, Bastian said. But we both know I can't. He paused a moment, and then said, What do you need from me? My brothers, Shannon said. Both of them. All I can give you is me, he said. We both know that. And that's why I don't think things can be fixed as easily as you seem to want it to be. We're talking civilly, and that's taken nearly 2 years. The wounds are deep, but they've begun to scar over. With time, they'll heal some more. But it's going to take time. Time measured in years, not weeks, or even months. You hurt all of us and hurt us deeply. Sebastian started to interrupt him, but Shannon held up his hand. Hear me out. No, you weren't the only one who hurt us. Chelsea played as much a part in this as you did. And Grace's hands aren't spotless either. About Chelsea, Bastian began. What about her? Can you heal things with her too? When she asks, I'll consider it, Shannon told him. But the only person you can ask for is you. And Tabitha? I don't hold anything against Tabitha. She's the only innocent person in this whole mess. I thank you for that much. So, how are you liking UK? It's different from being back home, that's for sure. My classes right now are pretty general stuff, so it's not kicking my butt yet. That won't start happening until I get into my advanced chemistry classes. Are you still planning on being a chemical engineer? Yep. Melissa and I both. We like chemistry. Who knows, I may even go into explosives. There's no problem that can't be solved by the proper application of high explosives. Something like that, Shannon told him. June 2008. Kai had stood in front of the arbor and at the altar erected in the back garden of Bon Travail, Lance McKnight's plantation house. Hunter stood next to him, and next to Hunter was Ryan. Ostensibly, they were there to make sure he didn't run. In reality, they were each holding the other up after last night's evening of drinking and bonding. Across the altar was Chastel standing in all her glorious beauty, her hair braided under a white veil held in place by a plaited ring of wildflowers. Standing with her were 2 of her friends. Kai wasn't sure if they were witchkin or not, but he suspected that his bride may have shared more about their private lives than he was entirely comfortable with, as they kept looking at him and giggling. Chastel was dressed in a long white gown with a gold cord wrapped around the hips as a belt. Kai was in a formal kilt with all the accoutrements. Chastel had gone as far as to research the clan Darrow tartan for his kilt and had it custom-made. Kai was starting to suspect that his soon-to-be in-laws were far more connected than he'd ever realized. To be honest, he remembered very little of the ceremony conducted by a druid that the Lees had flown in from Ireland. Evidently, he was a relative of some sort. Chastel's mother's former brother-in-law, or something like that. Kai's head was still a bit fuzzy from all the whiskey he had consumed last night with Ryan and Hunter and the druid, whose name was Sean, and that was all he could remember about him. Evidently, the ladies had stayed in at Bon Travail's and tasted deeply of its wine cellar. For some reason, Mr. McKnight was only happy to oblige the couple. Kai had no problem with being married in a pagan ceremony. He'd lost much of his own faith right after the unpleasantness with his brother. And to be honest, the more he learned about being a witchkin, the less comfortable he was with that faith. It was kind of difficult to not accept witcheries and witchcraft when you actually lived with it. Although excited about the day, he was very glad when all the ceremonies were over, toasts had been made, pictures had been taken, and he and Chastel were quietly ensconced in their first-class seats aboard an airliner heading toward their honeymoon in the French Alps where they would do some summer skiing. Kai was very excited about that. Chastel looked over from her seat and reached out and took his hand. "All mine." "Huh?" he asked. Grinning wickedly, she said, "You're all mine and I'm going to keep you forever." "That's the plan," he told her. "If you'd asked me 3 years ago, I'd say my life was over. Now it's only just begun, and it's good." "I'm glad you think so," she said. He leaned back into his chair and closed his eyes. He still had a slight headache from the takeoff, mixed with a bit too many spirits the night before. "I will just be glad to get off this plane. My head is not handling the change of air pressure well." "And just how much whiskey did you, Ryan, Hunter, and Sean put away last night?" "I don't know. A couple of bottles, I guess." "Bottles?" she asked. "What made you guys decide to drink so much?" "At the time it seemed like the thing to do. We started off with little sips comparing Irish whiskey with Scotch and bourbon." "And what decision did you come to?" she asked with a smile. "That the Irish make pretty good whiskey." "For the Irish," he told her with a smile. "Well, here's a couple of aspirins," she told him. "I'm not going to tolerate a headache tonight." She handed him a little packet from her purse. "Yes, ma'am," he told her, wagging his eyebrows. Duly noted. They spent the rest of their flight gently holding hands and enjoying the flight as much as a person can enjoy 14 hours in a pressurized aluminum tube rocketing through the sky at 30,000 feet. He was nearly as exhausted as when he'd left when they finally closed the door to their honeymoon suite. This particular trip was a gift from the producer/director of the movie he was working on. The man was very impressed with Kai's work. "How's your headache?" Chastel asked him. "Gone for the most part," he told her. "Good," was all she said before she leapt at him and bore him to the bed. Kai felt his exhaustion slip away as his wife kissed him long, deep, and soulfully. He could feel her heart beating, her breath was hot and tasted of mint, and her hands were all over him. It was 2 hours later when she fell asleep, her head resting on his shoulder, the braids in her honey blonde hair finally gone. He felt himself drifting off to sleep as he gently wounded in and out of his fingers. Life was indeed good. There was a picture of Rain standing in front of an arched arbor covered in spring flowers. He was wearing a kilt and was dressed formally. He was holding hands with a beautiful blonde in a white dress that looked like it had been lifted from a fantasy movie set somewhere. The caption under it read, "Lee Darrow Wedding." Under that was a brief description. Chastel Lee weds are Kai Darrow June 1st. Chastel Opal Lee of Gulf City, AL, and Rain Kai Darrow of Russell, Kentucky were married Sunday, June 1st at noon at the plantation home of Mr. Lancelot McKnight known as Bon Travail. In Gulf City, AL, Drewy Sean Whalen of Innisfree, Ireland officiated. The bride is the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Robert and Cassandra Lee of Gulf City. Hunter Dare of Malibu, California was the best man. Ryan Lee, brother of the bride, was his groomsman. Annette Louviere of Lillian, AL was the maid of honor, and Patricia d'Iberville of Silver Hill, Alabama, was the bridesmaid. The couple left for a honeymoon in Auvergne-Rhône-Alpes, France for summer skiing directly after the wedding reception. Melissa watched him as Tom Darrow read the copy of the newspaper clipping from the Gulf City Times-Journal. With a smile, she said, "I found Rain." Tom picked up the clipping and looked at it again in silence. Then looking over at her, he asked, "Have you shown this to anybody else?" "Just Shannon." "I'm taking it to Mom next," she told her father. "Do me a favor, don't show it to Bastian or Chelsea." "Why not?" she demanded. "It will just reopen old wounds," he told her. "Dad, It's bad enough that we have to find out about Rain getting married from a clipping in a newspaper 800 miles away, but I refuse to walk on eggshells about him to either of them. They made their bed. Let them lie in it. I for one am deliriously happy for Rain. She looked at the picture again, and then added, "It looks like Rain traded up." What a thing to say. Her father protested. Really? Melissa asked. Chelsea was always a bit on the frumpy side at best. This girl, this woman, Chasdell, is downright beautiful. And what a name, Chasdell. Melissa, please don't misinterpret what I'm about to say as you are likely to do, but I couldn't be happier that Rain has found some modicum of happiness and success. But dragging this out to the rest of the family is just going to cause more heartache. So Rain is still outside of the family? We don't even acknowledge that he exists or ever existed because it might upset the golden child and his wife. Her voice dripped with sarcasm. Rain deserves better than that. She got up from her seat and stalked out of the room, passing Grace as she went. What's got her in a tiff? Grace asked as Melissa exited the front door. Don't slam the front door, he called after her. Tom took the copy of the clipping and handed it to his wife. He watched as she read over it. Are you sure it's our Rain? Just how common do you think the name Rain Darrow is? He asked. Especially from Russell, Kentucky? You have a point, she told him. Well, at least he's gotten over his mad spell. What on earth makes you think that? He asked his wife. A man doesn't get over what happened to him. He learns to live with it. He learns to cope with it. He learns to forget it when he can, but he never gets over it. So what are you going to do? Me? Nothing. I'm going to let him live out his life with whatever happiness he can find. That's rather uncaring of you, she told him, hands on her hips. He looked over at her and said, Do you really think that? Right now, this family is trying to heal from what was done to Rain. Nothing that had happened was Rain's fault, but he had to pay the price for it, and part of that price was being exiled from the family. Exiled? Yes, exiled, he told her. You may not understand what Rain is feeling. No, as a matter of fact, I know you don't understand what he feels, otherwise you wouldn't have said half the nonsense you have. But there is no way Rain could come back to the family and look us in the eye, with us all knowing what happened to him. Sebastian did far worse than taking Rain's girlfriend and then beating him. He cucked him, he emasculated him, and then told him that it was his fault he was lying on the floor a bloody mess. Rain had to leave. I'm not happy with it, and I'm very likely never going to forgive either Bastian or Chelsea for what they've done, but at least I understand it. In the end, I was forced to sacrifice one son for the happiness of the other. That's not fair, Grace said. Rain couldn't expect Chelsea to wait for him when he was gone for months at a time. Tom stood and looked his wife dead in the eye. He'd had enough of this garbage. I don't ever want to hear you say that again. Get something straight in that crooked little red head of yours. Rain is in no way responsible for anything that happened here. It's all on Sebastian and Chelsea. Now I will keep my mouth shut to keep the peace, and because I don't want it to cause poor Tabitha any problems. But I am not likely to forgive or forget very soon. Sebastian cost me a son because he couldn't keep his hands off his brother's girlfriend. That's something I'm not likely to get over, but I'll live with it. I suggest you learn to live with it too. He could see his words hit her like a train. She wasn't used to being talked to this way. Tom was for the most part an easygoing man who didn't rile easily, but he was sick of this mess. All he wanted was his family back, and that was the one thing he was probably never going to get. He picked up the newspaper clipping and stalked out of the room. August 2008. Chasdell Darrow was somewhat nervous about what she had to show her new husband. They'd only been married a few months and were settling into their beautiful new white and blue home on Condé Avenue on Dauphin Island. She poured herself a cup of coffee, grabbed her tablet, and went out onto the back deck. The early morning view of British Bay was spectacular. She sat down on the steps that led down to the water's edge. She opened the email on her tablet and read, Chasdell, you don't know us, but our names are Melissa and Shannon Darrow. We are your husbands, Rain's younger brother and sister. We have no idea how aware you may be of the events that led our brother to have no contact with our family. We, Shannon and Melissa, are very sorry about the events and are nearly as unhappy with the family as Rain probably is. We just wanted to let you know that you have at least one brother and sister-in-law out here who want to say congratulations and welcome to the family. Please send our love to our brother and let him know that we still love him and miss him. Mother sends her warmest regards as well. Shannon and Melissa Darrow. The email address was at transy.edu. She had no idea what that meant, except of course it was a university or college somewhere. Morning, Kai said as he stepped out onto the deck with his own cup of coffee. Morning, she said looking up to him. He was wearing a light blue polo shirt that matched his eyes, and white cargo shorts and deck shoes. His blonde hair was getting sun streaks in it from days spent on the deck, and he'd tanned quite well. "What you readin'?" he asked. Shrugging, there was no way to break this to him easily. "Sit down here and let me show you." She patted the step next to her. He kissed the top of her head and sat down. "I got this email this morning." Taking the tablet, he read it. She watched his blue eyes dart back and forth across the lines on the device. He stopped and laid the tablet down on the deck. Sipping his coffee, he looked out over the bay. Finally, he took a deep breath and said, "If you'd like to answer them, please don't think that I would even begin to think to tell you not to." Shannon and Melissa were still in high school when everything happened. I know that there are some issues between them and my dad and his wife, Grace. Issues that I happen to agree with them about. I have no idea how my family is handling my absence, and I'm not sure I want to know. All I can say is that I won't be hurt if you talk to them. They are about as innocent of the whole mess as anyone could be. I'll be honest and tell you that it would be a different story if it were Sebastian, but I won't hold it against the twins. Do you want me not to answer? No. I want you to do what you want to do. To be honest, I regret the fact that I missed their high school graduation, that I've missed talking about their college experiences with them. I just can't bring myself to reach out. They keep calling you by your first name. He nodded. I started using my middle name when I moved to Gulf City. I needed a break from my family, and doing that helped me. In some ways, those events happened to Rain, not to Kai. In some ways, Rain is dead to me. Chastel snuggled in close to her husband and laid her head on his shoulder. I understand. I would like to know at least someone in your family. If nothing else, to have something to tease you about. But, if you are in the least bit uncomfortable, I won't answer it. I'm not uncomfortable with the twins. However, please don't send them my email. I'm not ready to handle that yet. She nodded and said, "Understood." "What are your plans for the day?" he asked. "Depends on whether or not you are going into the office." He shook his head and said, "No. It's Saturday, and I've got the server farm full of renders, and a month's worth of scenes waiting to be rendered. I can't get much more done until the director gets back to me. We're at the point where we're blending the actors with the CGI, and there is only so much the servers can handle." He grinned and asked, "What are your plans, Mrs. Darrow, with me not going into work?" She leaned up and whispered in his ear, "Well, I was thinking that maybe I'd take you upstairs and hold you captive in the bed for several hours." He laughed and said, "You're nearly insatiable, but I like the way you think." She stood and offered him her hand. He took it, and she led him upstairs, leaving their coffee cups sitting on the breakfast counter. Shannon Darrow read the email his sister had forwarded him from Chastel. Shannon and Melissa. To say that your email caught me by surprise would be an understatement. Kai has made me aware of most of the situation surrounding his distancing from his family, so you can understand why I would show him your email and discuss with him how I should proceed. He tells me that he has no problem should I want to pursue a relationship with the two of you, that he holds no animosity toward you, only a deep sense of shame and embarrassment for himself. My words, not his. And I would like to be able to know at least some part of the family that has so graciously gifted me with my wonderful husband. He has, however, requested that I not be in contact with either Sebastian or Chelsea, and I am more than willing to abide by that request. Granted, I only know his side of the story, but from that, I don't think I would want to speak with them. Ironically enough, though, I have them to thank for my husband. Had they not betrayed him, he would have never come into my life. So, I can at least acknowledge that if not thank them for it, for I could never abide anyone who caused him as much pain as they did. So, yes please, feel free to contact me at any time. Tell me of yourself and your family. As for me, like the two of you, I'm one of a set of cross-gender twins. My brother Ryan introduced me to Kai at a Yule party. I'm unsure how they met, but I think it was through our mutual friend, Hunter Dare. They have, however, become close friends over the years, which is something for which I am very grateful. I am an ER nurse at Gulf City Memorial Hospital, although I'm taking continuing ed courses so as to eventually move over to labor and delivery. Kai is still working for Gulf City Light and Magic. He's currently the lead artist on a movie project that is due out sometime next year. His work has impressed the director so much that the man paid for our honeymoon in thanks for Kai's hard work. We live on Dauphin Island now, on British Bay with my min pin, Buffy. We hope to start a family soon. Outside of that, there is not much more to tell. Chastel Darrow. P.S. You will probably note that I know your brother is Kai. He began using his middle name after moving to Gulf City. He told me that the name Rain has too many painful connections, that in many ways, Rain is dead. I can understand that. There was an attached picture of her and his brother standing on a dock with what he assumed was the Gulf of Mexico behind them. They were smiling and Rain had a protective arm around her. They were dressed for warm weather, and each of them had sunglasses pushed up into their hair. Both looked at ease and were very happy. At least this was a beginning towards some kind of reconciliation. And what Chastel mentioned about Rain's feelings confirmed what his dad had told him. Rain, no, he felt he needed to think of his brother as Kai. Now, Kai had evidently built a very good life for himself and his new wife. He was very proud of his brother. His phone rang. Looking down, he saw it was Melissa. Answering it, he said, "Morning, sis." "Morning, bro. Did you get it?" "Just finished reading it," he told her. "It sounds like life is going well for him." "Yeah. What do you think about him using his middle name?" "It makes sense. It's going to take me a while to get used to calling him Kai." "Yeah, 17 years is a long habit to break," he said. "So, what now?" she asked. "Where do we go from here?" "Obviously not to Bastion or Chelsea. Probably not Dad either. Maybe Mom?" "I think Mom will understand," she replied. "I'll mention it to her. Show her the pictures." "Did you ever show her the wedding photo?" he asked. "Yeah." She cried. She thanked me for showing her, and then started crying over not being there for him when he got married. "I'm really worried about her. She's starting to withdraw." "I know. Maybe this will cheer her up some. Should we tell her about Tabitha?" "Mom knows about Tabitha. I mean Chastel, knucklehead. I'm sure she knows that she's been born. It's probably not a good idea to bring it up, though. It could bring back hard feelings. We don't want to ruin this before we get started. The question is, do we tell Dad?" "I'm not sure. He said something that surprised the hell out of me when I showed him the wedding picture." "What?" "That he doesn't think that he'll ever be able to forgive Sebastian and Chelsea for what they did to Rain. That he feels like Sebastian forced him to sacrifice Rain for his happiness." "Kai," Shannon said. "Huh. I think I agree with Chastel. We should call him Kai. Sebastian killed Rain. Now there's Kai. They're the same person." "No. Rain became Kai, but they're not the same. Kai has learned to live with what happened. Rain died from it." "You're getting a bit deep for me, Sean. You're starting to sound like Dad." "There's no need to get nasty," he joked. "Okay, I'll concede the point. I'll work on trying to think of him as Kai, but it's going to be hard. Rain bandaged my scraped knees. It was Rain who climbed the tree to get my cat out of it." "Understood. Why don't we show Mom what we've got this weekend? Then, we can decide what to do about telling Dad." "Sounds like a plan." October 2008. Chastel stood naked beside Kai as the full moon rose in the October sky. She could feel the orbs pull on her, but not its usual effects. She did not feel the change it brought wrap itself around her body, as it had every full moon since she was 11 years old. The pull was still there, but the change would not come. "Are you coming, Chastel?" she heard her mother ask, her voice becoming deep and gravelly as her own change began. "I don't think so tonight," Chastel said, looking over at her husband. "I can't call the wolf." "What?" her father asked from the other side of the car as he slipped from his hound form back down to human. Pulling on his trousers, he came around the car as Chastel pulled a robe around herself. "I can feel the pull of the moon, but the wolf won't answer," she said, her face worried. Suddenly Cassandra threw her head back and howled joyfully at the moon. Then she stalked over to where Chastel stood and sniffed around her head and shoulders. Growling lowly, she turned to Kai and sniffed him. A deep chuckle escaped her throat just before she licked the side of his face from jawline to hairline. Again, she looked back and forth between them before growling with great difficulty. One word, "Mother." With another howl, she and Ryan bounded off into the October night, howling joyfully. Next to them, Bob chuckled and said, "You won't be running with us for several months, Chastel." He leaned over and kissed his daughter's face before turning to Kai and telling him, "Take her home and feed her pickles and ice cream." "Mother?" Kai asked as the word dawned on him. He looked down at his wife's belly and grinned hugely before sweeping her off her feet and kissing her. Kai could barely control his excitement as he drove the two of them southward toward and then through Mobile, all down 193 and onto Dauphin Island. "Did you know?" he asked her, his face split wide with a grin. Chastel shook her head. "No, I had no idea. I thought we'd have to try harder than we were." She blushed and added, "You know, because of your injury. Evidently one is all that was needed to get the job done," he said with a smile. "I can't wait to tell Hunter," he told his wife. "I can imagine," she said softly. "You don't sound pleased," he noted. Shaking her head, she told him, "Don't get me wrong. I'm very pleased. It's just that I'm in a state of shock. The fact that I couldn't call the wolf means I'm further along than I thought I would be." Then a thought seemed to hit her. Or there are multiples. Is that likely? I'm a twin. Your brother and sister are twins. So it's possible, and multiples do run strong in most lycanthropes. "Why can't you shift when there is a pregnancy?" he asked. because shifting rips apart our insides and puts them back together. The only thropi who don't go through a painful, jerky transformation are cat shifters, like Hunter and metathropi like yourself. You know that Hunter is a shifter? Of course, I know he's a shifter. My nose works perfectly well. I never smell the cat on him, just blood. That too, she replied. And magic. Exactly where does he fall on the Witchkin scale? He asked her. I'm not sure he's on the Witchkin scale. I think he's something entirely new. Kai just nodded his head and dropped the subject. Why don't we pick up a pregnancy test at the drugstore on the way home and confirm it? Then you can make an appointment with your doctor to confirm the confirmation? She smiled and stroked the side of his face. I'm so glad you're here with me. He nuzzled her hand with his jaw and replied, I am too. We need to talk about names. We've got a few months to figure that out, she said. And I've got to convert one of the bedrooms to a nursery and then baby-proof the house. We'll have to get another car. There's no way we can get a child seat in this thing. He indicated his Opel Speedster. One thing at a time, Kai. We've got several months. He laughed and said, I'm sorry. I'm just so happy about this. She smiled at him, loving the way he was reacting. He was all gung-ho and ready to take on the world. It was one of the things she loved about him. Finally, she said, and we need to decide whether or not to tell Shannon and Melissa. He nodded, the ardor in his eyes knocked down just a bit. I guess we need to wait until we get a doctor's confirmation. Kai, she said, softly. Yeah? It wouldn't be fair to ask them to keep this news to themselves, she said. Again, he stopped and considered what she meant. His visage shifted to a more thoughtful look. Finally, he nodded and said, tell them. If they tell the rest of my family, that's fine. I'll deal with what I must. Well, let's think about it for a while. First, we'll get the pregnancy test, and then I'll talk to my doctor and we'll look at the ultrasound and tell them then. You're brilliant. Did I ever tell you that? Once or twice, she replied. Good. As long as you know. And as long as you know I love you. Christmas 2008. It took Melissa a few moments to realize what she was looking at. Obviously, it was an ultrasound recording, but it seemed a bit strange. Then she realized that she was looking at triplets. What news? She grabbed her phone and raced downstairs to where her mother was pulling the turkey out of the oven. Her mother was beginning to look more than a little ragged. Melissa suspected it was because Chelsea and Bastian had been leaning on her for help with watching Tabitha while they worked and went to school. Mom, she said. Careful, Melissa. This pan is hot, she said as she lifted it up to the counter to let it cool. Then brushing her hands on her apron, she asked, What? I've got something to show you. Smiling, her mother seemed to get caught up in Melissa's enthusiasm. What? Melissa stood next to her and started the video playing. For long moments she watched the three little figures dance and move around each other. Whose ultrasound is this? Look at the name, Melissa told her. C.H. Darrow. Don't tell me that Chelsea is pregnant again. Melissa smiled. Not Chelsea, Chastel. Chastel? Rains Chastel? She asked. The one and only. Where did you get this? It was in my mailbox this morning when I checked my email. Bring me my tablet off the coffee table in the family room if you would, she asked her daughter. Melissa ran and got the device for her mom and handed it to her. Here you go. Would you keep stirring the cranberry sauce? Ruth asked her as she sat down in a chair and called up her email. At the top of the list was a message from her daughter-in-law with the message, a little holiday surprise. Ruth smiled at the title and opened the email to find a video labeled 16.5 weeks. She couldn't believe it. The poor woman was expecting triplets. Triplets. She turned to her and asked, Do your dad and Grace know? Not that I know of. After I showed Dad Rain's wedding picture, he asked me not to share that news with Sebastian or Chelsea. So Shannon and I have kept that we've been talking to Chastel under our hats. But have you talked to Rain? Shaking her head, she said, No. Chastel tells us he's not ready for that. I think I understand, her mother told her. He's still ashamed of what Sebastian did to him. I don't understand that, Melissa said. Rain was innocent, yet he's ashamed. Her mother stopped and gave her daughter a long and steady look. Then she looked down at the floor and said, I do. When I found out that your dad was cheating, I felt ashamed. I worried about what I didn't do as a wife that made him stray. I didn't want anyone to know that I'd been cheated on. Sebastian took that up a notch or two with Rain. That was the first time Melissa had ever heard her mother talk about the reasons for the divorce from her dad. Melissa smiled wanly at her mother and pulled her into a hug. Well, they'll just have to miss out on a wonderful Christmas announcement, then. She heard her mother sniff into her tissue and then released the hug. Damn onions. Melissa nodded, and then she noticed the cranberries on the stove. Oh no. She dashed over just in time to stop the thick, hot liquid from boiling over onto the burners. Almost didn't make it. Her mom just chuckled and said, "That's why I usually cook Christmas dinner alone. Too many distractions." Then looking around, she asked, "Where's Shannon?" "He went over to Sebastian and Chelsea's place." "What for?" "He and Sebastian are trying to patch things up between them." "How do you feel about that?" "That's between the two of them." Evidently, Sebastian approached Shannon back in January to try to ease some of the pain between them. "They're at least trying." "What about you? Why aren't you trying?" Melissa frowned and said, "We're working on it. I'm still having a hard time forgiving both Sebastian and Chelsea." She shrugged and added, "And if I'm totally honest, I feel like I was betraying Rain by patching things up with Bastian." "Has Rain asked you not to? Has Chastel?" Melissa shook her head and said, "No, but I just can't get past it." "Well, that's your prerogative. I'm sure that Rain appreciates the gesture, but I'm not so sure he would want you to harbor all this anger." "I know. Just give me some time." Dear listeners, the next part will be out in a few minutes. Meanwhile, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.